So 3, 2, 1. So Eric, thanks a lot. You're the first returning guest. I really appreciate this. If people want to take a look at your history, they can go to the original Indaba I had with you. Great having you on.
No, it's great to be here. Thanks for honoring me with being the first repeat. No idea.
So within the space, there are a few people who you consider as adult supervision. Bitcoin adult supervision. I would go as far as to say you're hardcore Bitcoin adult supervision. And this is done with your work with libbitcoin, but more importantly, from an education, well, not more importantly, equally important is the work that you've done on the crypto economics. This is the education. Like some consider that is the bottom of the rabbit hole.
They go hand in hand. It's hard for me to imagine really being able to do one without the other. What do you work on when it comes to the code? How do you decide what you're doing if you don't understand how it really works? And how do you understand how it really works if you've never been in the code? So they're complementary. I try to keep it that way. I got out of the code too much for too long, so I made the decision about 1.5 years ago to really dedicate myself to the code. So I don't do much with the book anymore. I still do the podcast and occasional conference, but mostly just in the code.
Yeah, good. Now, whenever you get your feathers ruffled, should I say, I think it's up to like the people, well, at least myself, is to sort of like ask you, your feathers got ruffled recently. And I think I think it's important to sort of like get to the bottom of this, because you're always going to have your actors in place, and the crypto economics, you detail the way, for example, we know that the threat model, the threat actor is the state, and we already anticipate and understand the different phases that you can move into. Like Bitcoin can be in sort of like a peaceful state where it's not in fighting with the state, and then it can escalate to a stage where it could potentially be fighting with a state, or is fighting with a state in the form of hash wars and whatnot. But recently we've seen in the form of an individual from the state publishing some material. Is there cause to be concerned about this? What do we have a potential advancing on Bitcoin, shall I say? I have my own hypothesis about this sort of thing, but I really would like to chat to you about it and to get your perspective on this matter.
I do. Once every few years, I tend to notice something that just somehow, for some reason, feels like it deserves attention from me, and that's I could point to 2 other cases where that's very specific and directed on my part. This is another. I'm trying to think if there are any others, but in those other cases, what I saw is kind of like what I saw here, is that there was a narrative that was flawed and growing rapidly in the community. Right, it was being widely embraced, and in each of these cases, I saw harm from that. It's really hard to define this, like the way you described it. Is there a threat coming, whatever? It's not really, in terms of threat in each of these cases. It's more a distraction from what we do, right? And people are free to do whatever they want to do. And, I don't have a huge following. I maybe have some dedicated people that, but I, to the extent that anybody wants my opinion on these things, or is trying to use me as a way to stay focused, I feel kind of a responsibility to tell them how I see it. And in most cases, it's just pretty obvious nonsense, or it's already well covered and there's really no reason. But something new comes along that starts to take hold and people don't really know what to think. That's, if I think it's fine, I don't say anything. If it's something that's really a distraction and misleading and, say counterproductive or wasteful of a lot of people's money or time, I tend to point it out. And also it has, I'm not going to do that if it's not some area where I feel I have some experience or expertise.
Mm-hmm.
I make very few comments on, say, layer 2 stuff. I don't work in it. I don't really, I make some general observations, but I just don't work in it. I don't at this point find it very interesting. Not positive or negative, just not my thing right now. And I'm not in the code. I still work completely in Bitcoin, and so I don't. But in this case, and you have areas where my expertise overlaps quite a bit in ways that there, I don't know anybody else in the community who has that kind of overlap. And so it's almost like people, kind of started asking me, like, what do you think? And, turning to me going, can you validate this? What's going on here? And I didn't know, I wasn't paying attention. I just, so I poked around them, and it just, so it all kind of felt wrong. And I just felt somewhat of an obligation to at least give my perspective on the aspects of it that people were curious about from me because of that overlap. My military background, for example. Right. I'm sure there's other people that do a lot, kind of core development or economics work in Bitcoin that, that have, were career military, but I don't know any. I can't think of any. And I was a career fighter guy. I flew off of ships and I taught tactics. I graduated from Top Gun. I operated at the highest levels of kind of military aviation tactical expertise. I have friends that been in space with NASA and are still there. And I have friends that are test pilots and Top Gun instructors and Blue Angels and whatnot. So I was a mid-level officer when I got out. I was if I hadn't have resigned my commission, I would have been at the same rank at the time I got out as this gentleman is. And so I kind of understand, how things work at those levels. Like what what level of influence you have, how you end up in a college tour, right? Going to school,
state funded,
what the jobs really mean, like work history and stuff. Like, what has this person done and how are they connected? And, I was able to, in a few minutes, use my connections to verify that he is who he claims to be and did do the work that he, did produce the thesis and went to MIT and all that stuff. So, that was easy to do. I thought that was a bare minimum level of, of investigation. I should at least do, like, is this just fraud? Like, because it sounds so weird and wrong, right? But no, I was able to contact people that personally know him and said, yeah, it's legit. But beyond that, what do you? I mean, background isn't really what matters, right? Ideas matter. When the ideas and the process just doesn't really make sense, it makes you kind of scratch your head and look around and like start questioning everything. And that's kind of what people were doing. And I have to admit, I was a little bit confounded by the whole thing. And it would normally just pass unnoticed, but there was an awful lot of kind of gravity there, like just like I've seen before, people grabbing onto these ideas and just running with them for years. The previous one, the most recent other one that I can think of is the rainbow chart nonsense, right? That was just pure economic, nonsense. And
I think wasn't Rainbow Chart supposed to be a troll on the stock to flow nonsense?
Oh, I don't know. I'm just referring to the stock to flow nonsense.
Oh, okay. All right.
The rainbow charts. I don't know. It's anonymous, right? So it can't be really anything about personality, background. What are you trying to do here?
Sure. It's the idea.
Some anonymous person who puts this stuff out, but the ideas didn't originate there. They just he or she took them and grew them into something. Some little cult. They had been kicked around from a book that was published earlier, which was one of my other preceding issues. Like this is a bunch of nonsense, and people are just over time, in both cases, people started to see that, right? I mean, to me, I didn't, you can't predict these things, so who knows? I mean, maybe the price prediction chart would have just matched price forever, and he would have been. All I can say is none of this is actually useful and predictive, and so we had this back and forth on, well, I'm not predicting anything. Well, then then there's no point in any of this. Right? You are predicting things, and you just want to have it both ways, right? So anyway, over time, what happened is there was there were more than one standard deviation from the prediction actually occurred, and then there was new predictions, right? And so it just played out the way I would have expected, and but in the meantime, there were people wrapped up in it. And there's a lot of energy, and it's just nonsense. It's like horoscopes, right? I mean, I know a lot of people, I know people personally in Bitcoin that are really into horoscopes, and I'm okay with that. But let's not pretend that there's some kind of rational, kind of scientific, economic basis for any of this stuff. It's just hocus pocus. So it tends to, when you tell people what they want to hear, you tend to get big followings, and when you tell people how it is, you tend to get loyal following. I guess I have some people who are diehard, supporters, but I don't know how many followers I have, but I don't have anywhere near some of these people.
So do you think this is an element of excuse me, do you think this is an element of like the Eternal September? You're probably familiar with the Eternal September. No. So like during the early stages of the internet at universities and whatnot, like every September would be the new round of students that come on, and like administrators of the internet, they suddenly started noticing that, well, now this internet thing has gone beyond the universities, and adoption of the internet is happening outside, and more people are, it's every month, every month is now September kind of thing. So like new waves of people are coming all the time. And as a result, that maybe they don't have the sort of base knowledge of, how the internet works. And you have to go through this whole process of sort of like re-educating on basic levels on how to use the internet. Fundamental knowledge is not there. And as a result, you get these talking heads that enter the space who might not be grounded as some of the stronger, more knowledgeable people are in the space, such as yourself. And as a result, the lack of focus happens, and you need to sort of refocus on what the crucial issues are. So maybe we can use this as an opportunity to sort of like highlight, okay, we've got this sort of situation, and let's refocus on something that's more important, which is like, the material that has been illustrated in your crypto economics book. So yeah, do you think it'd be a little bit of an Eternal September kind of thing going on?
When you describe that, I mean, I'm not familiar with the metaphor, but I just thought of I forget what I can't remember the name of it, but it's like Black Tuesday type thing, when all the AOL users came on the internet all at one time. They had their own private network, email on CompuServe, AOL, I don't know.
Walled-off garden, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, CompuServe was kind of nerdy. There was some other ones I can't remember right now. I never had a computer during those days. I wanted one. I couldn't afford one. And I used to write code on paper and take it to school and go to the broom closet where they had the one computer and type it in, and then save it off to a cassette tape, because that was our disk drive. but I couldn't, you know, no networking open. I mean, that stuff. And so you know, but these things grew up, and we, you know, AOL was good enough at making it user friendly. So, you know, they ended up with all the idiots on there. I had no idea how anything worked. It's kind of like you described. It's all these people just massively on AOL, but have no, you know, they know how AOL works. And then all of a sudden AOL finally realized they couldn't really keep them off the internet. So they just dumped them all on them one day. You know, it was like this catastrophe, like, you know,
Yeah.
spam idiot catastrophe all over the internet, news groups and emails and stuff. So yeah, I mean, that's maybe there's an analogy there when, you know, when another shitcoin collapses and they all, you know, decide they're going to take a look at Bitcoin and then bring all their great ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't know. I don't interact with enough. I guess these people that it doesn't feel that way to me. I just I don't know. I kind of work on my own. I'm not in any, you know, big club, and what you see, if you see me doing something on Twitter, that's what I see. I mean, that's the extent of my universe. Unless I go out to a conference or something, I have a, you know, small group, like few people that work with me on the code. And I go, you know, I used to, a couple of years back, I was traveling a lot. I was at a conference like once or twice a month all around the world. And I tend to see the same people over and over again. You know, a little cadre of people that speak at these conferences that are like reasonably sound Bitcoin conferences. And like, I'll be out at, I'd never done a conference in the US. And believe it or not,
Surprising.
and until like a month or two ago, I did this thing in Jackson Hole because I hadn't been skiing, you know, yet. And I hadn't traveled, and I got an invite. I'm like, all right, I'll go to Jackson Hole. It was a small thing. It's not recorded. So I'm like, okay, you know, but it wasn't really my thing. And I only knew two people there. The person that invited me and the like, one speaker that it's not my, you know, not my thing. But didn't circulate in the same club of thing. And so I did during the, you know, the COVID, I did a remote speaking for the Bitcoin conference in Miami.
Yeah.
And that was only because I knew I got invited by Andy Van Werdum, who was moderating the panel. And, you know, all it required me to do was sit here and do what I'm doing now. And I knew everybody on the panel. It was Adam Back and who else was in there? Boo Matt, and I think it was Bob McElrath, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So yeah, I just know these guys, and they're like, all right, yeah, sure. Well, that sounds great, but I avoid conferences, you know, big things like that. So anyway, I'm doing it this year. I'm actually going there. I'm gonna be there. There's my plug for.
So when we're gonna have the next libbitcoin conference in like Hanoi or something like that?
Yeah, well, I have it every year on leap year.
Okay.
It's every year on February 29th. And so it's coming up again, maybe next February, I think.
And where will it be?
In Hanoi.
And always in Hanoi.
I'm not announcing that because I don't know if that's going to happen. It's actually scarily close, you know, right now to be less than a year away and I have to do it. I pulled it off in, I don't know, like 4 months last time, but I think
I'll definitely come to that one. We can
my head's not really in it right now. I'm just really into code, and I'm like, I'd love to do another one, and I don't know, I just don't know when. But if I was going to do another one, I would probably set it up on leap year and do it in Hanoi in the same bike shop that I did it in before. If those guys I think they're still there.
Excellent.
I think they have the first printing of the book is all still there. There's probably at least 150 copies of it in a box there, and a whole bunch of t-shirts.
Oh, great. So it's going to be like rat eaten, you know, a little bit of like water stains.
And those great. Bitcoin, you know, those Bitcoin hand grenades?
Yes. You designed them, didn't you?
Well, I worked with a friend who he's kind of pseudonymous, you know, out there on Hans troll in jail. And he did a bunch of stuff for the conference, just free fun, you know. He made little videos. He made but what had happened? So we had a biker did a kind of a bike thing. It was in a motorcycle shop. That was the whole thing started where I had gone to Hanoi. You know, I'm a motorcycle guy, and I had met one of the I'd gone to Saigon and Hanoi ahead of time, and I actually I bought a bike in Saigon. I rode it to Hanoi, and then I got there and I met with a guy who was a local meetup Bitcoin guy, American, I think, and he was a biker. He was like a serious biker too, and so we kind of hit it off. And I asked him if he could just dig around. I was having a really hard time getting callbacks from universities and stuff. I was trying to use a university kind of setting, and he went to this bike shop, and when I was back in the States, and he contacts me and he says, "Hey, I found this place. I think you might like it." And I was like, "Holy shit, that's perfect!" And I just, it was done right there. Like as soon as I saw it, and then I got, so I went out there. I did some prep ahead of time, and I got to know the couple that runs the shop, and they're awesome. And so we set up this biker thing where unfortunately, because of COVID, we lost a lot of people, but a couple of us did actually go. We rented bikes from the shop, and it was like a special deal. They had to get them from somewhere else. They were I forget what's the Indian made bikes, but they were brand new, but kind of old school. And we got these bikes from them. We did this thing, and then we came back, and then I actually ended up keeping the bike for the entire conference. So I would ride it back and forth to the hotel, which is across town, and I would just drive it right in the front door, and park it next to the stage. It was so awesome.
You just need like disco lights on there or something as you come in there.
No, it wasn't
rev the engine like a bit,
no, there was no disco-y, no shitcoiny tech stuff there. We did have a big stage, and we had TV panels behind the stage, but it was a motorcycle shop. It was gritty, it was dirty, and super fun. They had a really nice African restaurant upstairs, and they did all the food for us. It was great. They brought in a live band. They vetted the band. The only problem I had was I had some issues with AV, the audio. They didn't get. I never got receipt of the inline audio, so I had ambient audio.
Oh.
So it wasn't good. But all the videos are up there on YouTube. So they did a good job with recordings, but they just blew it on the audio. And it was, again, the COVID. I couldn't go there. I wasn't getting responses. Maybe they went out of business. I don't know what happened, but they were all screwed. I was lucky to get anything. That's kind of how I felt. And we had to switch AV teams it was less than a week before the conference. So that was another big. They did the whole stage setup and everything. So they did a great job of setting that thing up and pulling it off at the shop. And we ended up losing about half the attendees. It would have been sold out. We were on track to sell it out, but it was like COVID hit, 2 months before, and turns out there was no COVID known in Vietnam during the conference. There was a little bit before, there was none during, and then there was again or after. And the motorcycle trip we did went right up along the Chinese border and came back down to Hanoi.
Oh, that's the Golden Triangle area, is that right? No, that's Thailand. The Golden No, sorry, different place. Keep going.
I don't know. It was it's been so long since I'm feeding these, but took a train up from Hanoi up into the mountains with the bikes, and then got out and rode further up in the mountains, kind of right along the border. It was actually one point where the GPS showed me in China, and I was like, who knows, like the roads, whatever. And later I asked a local, and they were like, no, you can't, there's guards and fences and everything. You can't cross over. They're not too tight.
You can't do that.
So apparently we didn't actually cross into China, but we were, the Wuhan flu was right over the fence apparently, and it never got us. And then we did the whole conference. We did 2 great outings on a rented big boat in Ha Long Bay overnight. I did it on the motorcycle trip, and then came back and we brought all the speakers and some of the attendees because we had open slots at that point. So a bunch of people just, we had dinners, spent the night on the boat, and came back on a fancy bus. The Vietnamese locals that helped us out was just amazing, right? I was able to do all this from my home in the States, and one visit out there ahead of time to just meet them.
Do it
And then
again, man. Do it again.
the bike trip showed up, and yeah, everything was easy. But it's like the conference was basically the content of the book.
Yeah.
And I did every other presentation, and I was able to maintain enough speakers that I was still able to do every other presentation. But I didn't, I lost half my speakers and half my attendees, but still did the full, content, had people filled in, and everybody had a good time. But it was, it was easy up until that point. And then everything started getting hard and painful, and it's like, oh, I'd like to do it again.
Yeah,
but
I'll make sure there's a good few people coming from Hong Kong to that one. So anyway, I think we got sidetracked a little bit with the libbitcoin conference in Hanoi, but which is a fantastic sidetrack. But yeah. So if we can sort of like get back onto the thing, which is okay. So what are the sort of major issues that you sort of like got that you have with the material? Why is it hocus pocus?
Oh, well, people, it's this funny thing. Like if you criticize anything the guy or the minions say, it's, well, you obviously didn't read the book. I'm like, well, no, I'm obviously not going to read a 500-page book that there's millions. So I tweeted this out today to somebody. I'm like, what are your thoughts on the book? I'm like, why would I read the book? It's like there's millions of books out there. Some books I would really like to read, and I find, based on what I've seen people say about them, reviews, etc., I find very interesting. This one, I have no reason whatsoever to want to read it. And it's funny because any critique about any comments made come back to buy the book, right? Like, no, I don't want the book. And I'm only commenting on your comments, and they don't make sense. And they're not going to make more sense to me if I buy the book. Because if you can't make sense to me, talking to me right now, it's just a scam, right? I haven't seen anything that made any sense. And I didn't watch it, but apparently Marty Bent did a podcast. I've been on there. I think I was on once. I went to Brooklyn. We did this thing, and he's great, right? He make it. There's no reason why. I think he had him on, right? And so I haven't watched it, but apparently he was unable to explain to a number of people's satisfaction what the hell he was doing or talking about. And there was a comment about that today. Like, if you couldn't explain it on, this podcast, why would I expect it to be any better in the book? And that was like, yeah, exactly. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me when you explain it to me with all the time in the world to explain it to me. Why am I going to pay you to explain it to me? Right. And you're basically saying, pay me, and then I'll tell you the truth. Right now, I'm just bullshitting. And I'm like, no, like, first of all, whatever I tell people about Bitcoin is free. You can get the book for free. You've always been able to get the book for free. Right. And, the conference, was all the videos are all out there free. Everything I know, all these podcasts, I've never taken a nickel to work in Bitcoin. And so that's the ethos that I see of Bitcoin, right? Bitcoiners, everybody's got to make a living. I was fortunate enough to have to be basically retired before I found Bitcoin. So this is what I've always done with Bitcoin. And it's one of the things I like about it. And I don't fault anybody for making a living on it, but it kind of rubs me, and I think probably some other people, the wrong way when somebody who's active duty military, which means the taxpayers are paying him every day to go to school and get a degree about something maybe tangentially related to the military. It's not really, essential when you get a degree in the military and the taxpayers pay for it, that it be relevant. But, then you put your book out, right, at a nice price point, and then just drive people like cattle to follow you through, what do they call it? Hate farming, or what the term was. But the techniques he was using are like, yeah, it's obvious. You're not like, it's like, everybody's like, wow, he's brilliant. He's driving. I'm like, those are like tried and true marketing techniques on social media. And yeah, he read a book on how to do it. He's doing it. And yeah, it does. There's reasons people don't do it. There's reasons I don't do it. I don't want everybody to think I'm an ass, right? and so I care more about my credibility than having shit tons of followers. And his argument was, well, this is important. It needs to get out there, and therefore we just need to drive as many people to do this as we can, so I can convince the president to do whatever I can. Okay, fine, right? That's your strategy. People are gonna look at you a little differently. And so, you put those things together and go, well, is this academic? Is it rigorous? Is this a serious person? Or do they really believe their own, hype about this being so important? It doesn't matter, what an ass they act like, as long as they get a lot of followers, because they're going to save, they're not going to save the world. They're going to save the United States from our enemies. So another thing that rubs me the wrong way, and I don't know, you're Australian living in Hong Kong. Is that what it was?
South African living in Hong Kong.
South African. Sorry, I have a hard time with those.
I know. It's okay. We're down there. We're down there.
And it's surprising. I've been to Australia and I've been to South Africa.
Oh,
yeah. and I've been to Hong Kong, but I still have a hard time with the Kiwis, the Aussies, and that.
It's all right. It's understandable.
Anyway, what I was going to say. So this whole thing is presented as military strategy, right? And okay, so I didn't go to like the war college. I didn't want to, and it wouldn't have been right time in my career, even if I did. I didn't take a disassociated tour to go get a degree or something like that. Disassociated from like warfare specialty.
Right.
But I was a pilot, and pilots want to fly. They want to stay current. They want to be tactical, right? So when you do your rotation in a squadron, you come off the ship. You could go get a degree, or you could go to you could apply to NASA, or you could apply to test pilot school. You could apply to Top Gun and become a strike fighter tactics instructor. Or if your objective is to get out, you could go to the training command and just fly shit tons of hours with students, right? Just fly 3-4 times a day and get a lot of hours so you go to the airlines. So there's a lot of different paths that people take, but people that have warfare specialties tend to align with their, like pilots tend to want to remain in a flying billet or go to the Blue Angels, right? I have friends that did all these things. I took the Top Gun route because I was the most tactical, and that's what I wanted to do. But people that just went to college, they were on their way out, right? They wanted to get a degree because they were going to go teach or something. That's what they were doing. It wasn't like going to really help your career. But as I understand it, he manages engineering projects for the Air Force. Right, no warfare specialty. Space Force is a branch of Department of the Air Force in the United States.
Okay,
kind of like the Marine Corps is a branch of the Department of the Navy. Right. So Trump gave it a name and a different force, but it's still under the Department of the Air Force. So sometimes I just conflate the two. It's Air Force, right? Air Force uniform. It's not really, not like the U.S. Air Force used to be a part of the Army. It's now not, right? It's the Department of the Air Force and there's the Army. But that happened after World War II. During World War II, it was the Army Air Corps. And that's kind of what the Space Force feels like, right? It's the part of the Air Force. Anyway, I don't know if they're putting up like, battleships in orbit or anything like that. I don't know if there's really any space wars going on. So it's kind of a, it's kind of a running joke of, among military people, the Space Force, and that's, it was kind of funny that, Trump was the one that took the plunge. Someday it's going to make sense, right? Right now, I don't know what they do, but
isn't it supposed to do with like satellite communication and coordinating?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. We have satellites, and the Air Force runs the military satellites because they're in the air, right? But there's no okay. NASA is a civilian organization that's supposedly non-military. I don't know if anybody's ever really fully believed that, but it's and it's been a lot that has been continuously offloaded to private contractors. It's probably a good thing in the long run. But eventually, military goes where people go, and military is going to go to space, and we're going to colonize Mars, and there's going to be military there. What was that? It was a series on last couple years ago. It's awesome, really good, well done. It was
called Space Force, wasn't it?
No, there's that.
Okay.
We should that one is really well done. It's so fucking funny. No, but there was one that was a little bit more serious. It was an alternative history and future of U.S. And Russian space exploration.
It's not the one with the Nazis on the dark side of the moon, was it? No.
No. That's I know what you're talking about. This wasn't that one. It was an Apple TV thing, I think. What was it called? For All Mankind.
Okay, I don't know
For All
this.
Mankind. It's really, it's, I think it's 2 seasons. It's really well done. It's just entertaining as hell. And the alternate, reality, the alternate future, like something different happened, and then everything after that is, but it's just a little different. So it's very close, but it's different. And so like, I don't know, like Nixon won the election, or Watergate didn't happen or something, and it just cascaded. But there's a real space force happening there at that, in the future. It's all done through NASA, so that's the thing. Like, but there's a lot of military, and they're all arguing about whether there should be or there shouldn't be. But there end up, so, and there are, there's certainly soldiers. I have a friend that's at NASA right now. He's he was career Navy pilot. I knew another. I didn't know him well, but I knew another Navy pilot that went down on the shuttle. Yeah, I flew with him. I was on the same air wing with him. I cruised with him, flew with him once. Named Willie McCool, and I always thought Willie McCool had the best actual name for a fighter pilot. He got EA-6P. He was flying Prowlers, which for a guy who, I mean, that's just such a tragedy.
Yeah.
Tragic irony that I'm Bill McCool, and I'm Prowlers. Oh, it's like, but yeah, he went down with the shuttle over Texas, and so they have military, but Space Force. It's almost like they should made the TV show first, and then they
Okay, so
life imitate art.
Yeah. So do you think there's an element of what's the equivalent of what physics envy? Do you know, where like all these other sciences are looking at physics and thinking, God damn it, I wish we had that kind of ability to predict what's going on. So now we have a scenario whereby we've got the Space Force looking at the rest of the military thinking, God damn it, I wish we had that degree of power projection.
Oh yeah. No,
okay.
As a military guy and historian, I can absolutely, right, and that's what the TV show is all about, right? Like, where the hell's our power? Where's our mission? What do we do, right? And this, I mentioned, historian. I'm not an actual historian. I play one on the internet, but
well, actually, you've got pretty good knowledge of Bitcoin, so I mean, you're very good there. So
I'm old enough to, my life can just be historian. But I had to take a course, and I had to take some courses in naval history and stuff when I joined the Navy in college. I joined after 2 years, and so one of these classes, we ended up talking about sea power. Alfred Thayer Mahan's kind of treatise on islands being all sea, Japan, England, United States, essentially kind of surrounded by water and becoming sea powers. And it was Japan that read this book and took it to heart and became a sea power, and probably helped create World War II. But what happened. So one of the things I remember learning about in these courses, and then again and again afterwards, was this thing called the Revolt of the Admirals. I think that's what they call it. There's Wikipedia articles about it. It's a very famous occurrence in the U.S. military history, where after during World War II was the Army and the Navy. Marine Corps was part of the Navy. The Army Air Corps was part of the Army, and that was it, right? You had the Army and the Navy. The U.S. legally is supposed to have can have a standing Navy, but not a standing Army constitutionally. So they reapprove the budget for the Army every 2 years, military budget. Anyway, the air power became important during World War II for the Navy. Carrier battles were significant in the War of the Pacific, and air power, especially in the war in Europe, was very significant. That was obvious after World War I. And so by World War II, we had nukes, right? So when the war was over in World War II, Air Force, brand new force, right? Now it's kind of like the Space Force today, but already having fought 2 wars in airplanes, right? It was a real thing, right? I know we put real satellites up, but there has yet to be, combat in space, as far as I know, even with satellites. So this was, it was tried and true. We were fighting with actual airplanes only a few years after they were invented. And originally they were, fighters were designed to shoot down balloons, observation balloons. And then they had to make other fighters to shoot down the fighters that were shooting down the balloons. And so that was the big birth of air combat over France in World War I. So this revolt of the admirals was this idea that we don't need Army and Navy anymore. We've got the Air Force, and we can drop a nuke on anybody. And to prove this, that we can defeat any Navy in the world, we're going to gather up a bunch of U.S. Navy ships that are leftover surplus from World War II. I mean, big-ass capital ships, and we take a whole bunch of them out to the Kalaijawan Atoll, and we're going to drop a fucking nuke on them in open air and take pictures of them going, up into space. And we did, right? And there's these famous photos of ships going up the side of the mushroom cloud. It's amazing. And believe it or not, that was accepted. Basically, they won that argument. And so I don't remember, it was very early 50s, late 40s, this was becoming US military doctrine that we'll just nuke anybody who opposes us, I guess, right? And they bought into it. It's a deterrent. Nobody can challenge you. But then what happened? Guess what happened?
Well, this was off the coast of Japan, right? And So
that was a test. That was a test that demonstrated the power of a nuke against the naval battle group, right? Well, and that was in the South Pacific and the Kalaijawan Atoll. The Kalaijawanis weren't too keen on it, by the way.
No, I'm sure, but they dropped bombs on like Hiroshima and whatnot.
Oh yeah, well that happened during the war, and this is after the war, right? Hiroshima, Nagasaki.
What happened then?
After the war, there was this argument that all we need is nukes. We don't need really much of an army or much of a navy because we got these airplanes and we could just fly out and nuke somebody if we have to, right? And eventually we'll have missiles, those stuff. And that was becoming doctrine. And this was called the revolt of the admirals. A bunch of US Navy admirals said, this is fucking stupid. And we're going to stake our careers on it. And they basically lost that argument. But then something happened that changed the strategy. And that was the Korean War. Right. So after World War II, there was this little war that is still going on.
Yeah, right.
Nobody's ever heard of, called the Korean War.
Yes.
And because it was nothing compared to World War II, and people had war fatigue from World War II, but it's only a decade later. And so it's sandwiched in between Vietnam and World War II. It's called the Forgotten War in the US, but it was a major conflict, and it was the United Nations that went to war. And the only reason that happened is because Russia and China were both boycotting the UN Security Council at the time. So the Security Council said, let's put the Chinese back into China, let's get them out of Korea. And so US led that effort, allies, I don't know exactly who, but the usual suspects went to Korea and pushed the Chinese all the way back to the Yalu River. And, MacArthur was up there saying, we should just nuke them. And he got fired for that. MacArthur was basically the general that won the Pacific War in World War II. Right. So he could say anything he wanted to, except I disagree with the president. I want to nuke the Chinese. Right. So he got fired. Congress gave him an opportunity to speak and all that. So this was the strategy, right? We're gonna nuke people, but then we realized, we needed ships and we needed Marines and we needed Army and we needed all this stuff, and we couldn't just live with an Air Force. And so the strategy changed radically, and the Cold War, had nuclear weapons as deterrent against nuclear weapons. Period. They were never used tactically, it could be. I mean, certainly could happen. But there's been an awful lot of conflict around the world, and nukes didn't stop it. Right. So, So the Air Force people, this is, a long-winded answer about responding to your comment about this is a solution looking for a problem, basically, right? We need to show, where's our power? And this is what the Air Force did when they left the Army. They were looking for their power, and they felt like they had this position that was so much stronger than the Army and the Navy because they had nukes. Well, it turns out the Navy, ended up with a lot of nukes. Nuclear submarines are an extremely important aspect of the nuclear triad, and also nukes off of carriers. But the Navy was so desperate to get nukes off of carriers, they put the first the first airplane that carried a nuke was a propeller-driven, single-piloted airplane. Yeah. It was the AD Sky Raider, And the 80 Skyraider, they stretched out the landing gear and slung a nuke under that thing, and you could they called the mission one man, one man, because single seat aircraft, one engine, one man,
One bomb.
one bomb, one way. You're not coming back.
Oh shit.
So then they made the A4, which was designed to deliver a nuclear weapon. So it has big long legs, and it's got this area to hold this huge bomb under, one nuke underneath it, single piloted still. So they just kept that joke going. I actually trained in A4s. I even did the nuclear weapon delivery profile training.
Oh shit.
In the A4, and flew it live in California. Practice bombs, and it was crazy. Like, you could, even with a jet, single engine jet, you'd be lucky to escape the blast. And so one man, one engine, one bomb, one way was still active. But the Navy eventually got more advanced planes that could carry nukes. I actually went to nuclear weapon loading school. I was an F-18 guy, and we were nuclear capable, and I was in the personal reliability program, which means I was all checked out to single pilot.
Oh God!
With a trigger, with the ability to drop that thing if it so happened, and I got qualified to supervise the loading of them with another qualified person.
Except this would be a two-way, right?
This would probably be two-way.
Probably.
Yeah.
Oh shit, bro!
Take it out. You get supersonic, you can outrun the. You're not going to outrun the light wave, light radiation, but you're going to outrun the sound wave if you can get supersonic after delivering it. Anyway, yeah. So
what an intense experience! Can you imagine that? Jesus, your entire cockpit just goes bright light, and then you're like, "Oh fuck! Can I get out of here?"
One of the interesting little known factoids of U.S. military aviation history is that the Harrier
yes, the one that can go vertical, right?
Yeah, the one that everybody thinks was designed so the British could have shorter ships or something.
Yes.
That was a Cold War project that was done in complete secrecy for a long time. And it turned out that they were flying those things. They were test flying them at Pease Air Force Base, which is a Strategic Air Command headquarter base for the East Coast of the United States. And it was in my hometown. So I grew up in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and it was in Portsmouth, Newington. It's like, so I went to school with the kids that were on the base and stuff like that. So nobody knew this was happening, but there's a UFO book called Incident at Exeter. Exeter's a nearby town.
Yes.
And there were a lot of people reporting these unknown flying objects in that area. And coincidentally, but unrelated, the first UFO sighting in the world was a woman from New Hampshire, a woman and her husband from New Hampshire. So
right.
Betty, I can't remember her name, Betty.
Something or other.
So there was, it turns out that what was happening is these Harriers were very unstable, and they'd flip over in a farmer's field, and they'd have to get everything out of there, before anybody found out. And so people were kind of freaking out, seeing these things hovering sideways, up and down, and at night, these lights, and what is this, right? And it's crazy. Nobody knew such a thing existed. So it would be impossible unless you had a Harrier, right? Anyway, so these Harriers were developed, and it's interesting. They were flying them at a Strategic Air Command base. That's the base where you keep the nukes and the big heavy bombers. We had B-52s, then B-1s. And so the Harrier was developed to deliver a nuke. That was it. That was its sole mission. That was how it was produced. And, what happened was the Cold War was coming to an end, and this plane was super unstable. The Aviate-A they killed a lot of people. And I had friends that went to flight school with when I was a Marine who got Harriers, and we were like, good luck, man. He wanted F-18s, I think, but he got Harriers. And but the Bs were better; they're more stable, better airplane. The Royal Air Force or Royal Navy was flying Aviate-As when I was still in, I think. So yeah, they were kind of sketchy. If they weren't, everything wasn't just right, they just flip upside down and kill a pilot. And so they had developed these things to. Basically, the strategy was we were going to make a plane that could take off vertically with a bomb underneath it and deliver a nuke into the Soviet Union.
And then supersonic out.
No, fuck it. Those things aren't supersonic. No, they don't care about a guy getting out. So, but the key to it was they could deploy them anywhere. So the idea was you get you get like a flat piece of ground, maybe put a piece of steel on it or concrete or something, right? And you just put it out in the jungle of Afghanistan somewhere, up in the hillside, mountain. You just put one of these planes out there with a nuke on it, and a couple guys, rifles to watch it, and they're going to just sit there with camouflage overneath this one little tiny landing pad, and then, when the bubble goes up, they're just going to launch straight up and be there in 5 minutes. And that was the strategy. And then when the Cold War came to an end, we're like, what are we going to do with this nuclear weapons delivery platform that nobody really wants or needs? And the Marine Corps said, we'll buy it, because that's that's the kind of guys they are there. They're like, they can solve any problem, and it's really pretty awesome. But like when Congress steps up and says, what are we going to do with this thing? That's what they did. And so they made it into a close air support aircraft. And it turns out during the Gulf War, it had a horrendous record, and especially for maintenance. So everything wrong about that plane for close air support. But the A-10, which, they had to keep in service longer because it was such an awesome close air support airplane. So the Marine Corps ended up with Harriers instead of A-10s, and it was a disaster. But nobody knows because, people don't talk about those things. Anyway, that's the story about single piloted nuclear delivery systems, and the Air Force's desire to, be relevant, in the future after World War II, where they really wanted to kind of step out and show their dominance. And the reality is the Air Force is every bit as important as the Navy and the Army. The Navy has a limited air capability. It's pretty significant compared to most countries, but it's, we're the ones that, the Navy is the one that shows up tomorrow, right?
Right.
If something's going on, the carrier will be in your backyard, your front yard, in a matter of hours. And with an Air Force, it's probably bigger than your country, and at least with the capability that's stronger. And you could park a couple of those out there in just a matter of a day or two, and they're combat ready. They're ready to go. You want to send the Air Force to Europe to do something? That's a big project. Right? They sent the Air Force to Aviano and other bases out in Europe when I was there, when we did Bosnia. And Navy we were always on station, and we traded time with the Air Force, but that thing went on for years, and that's why they were out there. They don't, so there's a different mission, right? Marine Corps, like the Army, except not, right? They will be there tomorrow and storm your beach.
Right.
Right. And so when it has to do with speed of deployment, flexibility, mobility. You bring the Army, you're doing heavy airlift, sea lift. It's going to take months, and you're going to stay. If you watched the staging of Desert Storm, it took months and months, both times. And so it's a different role. So the Air Force has a, and the Space Force, we need satellites and all that stuff. Engineers do that kind of stuff. So that's like the operators kind of
wet
joke
dream
about the Space Force. There are no combat operators in something like the Space Force, because there's no combat, right? And even if they were dropping stuff from satellites, you're not combat rated. You're still an engineer, right? Like I have friends that have sat in trailers and flown drones, guys that were real pilots, like Top Gun graduates, like very, very tactical people. They sit in a trailer and fly a drone from like Oklahoma, and they're flying some drone out in Afghanistan or something. It's crazy, but they do that, right? But is that a warfare specialty? No, it's just a way to get a paycheck. And so warfare specialty means I'm a submarine guy. I'm special forces, SEAL team. I drive ships. I fly, combat airplanes. And those things are called warfare specialties. You get a warfare pin, right? You get combat pay for what you do, because you go into harm's way. There is no such component that I know of in the Space Force yet. So it's not, for military guys like me, there are a lot of people that provide support that are like officers, whatever, in the Navy. They don't have a warfare specialty, right? Like supply officers, right? Important job. Some people love it. But they're not people that are not line. I don't think I don't want to misspeak and insult supply officers, but line officers are people who have the authority legally to order people in combat, right? They give lawful orders.
So they're the solid line, not the dotted line.
Well, the term line, it's like a ship of the line. That means they're a combat ship. They go out on the line and they hold
okay, that's the one. Okay,
okay. Line officer kind of means, I think,
okay.
Right? So if you're not an officer of the line, you're not, you're kind of you have rank, but you don't have authority when it comes to combat, right? You'd have authority in like general, whatever. You're in the room and you have the same rank as somebody. That's great. But if there's a line officer that you outrank and you're not a line officer and it's a combat situation, you're not in charge, right? Because you don't have a worker specialty.
Right.
So at least that's my understanding of it. And I think I have it right. So yeah, okay, there's a Space Force. There's no line officers as far as I know, right? There's no combat. They're all engineers in one way or another, or supply people. They manage contracts. They might think tactically. Certainly, I don't want to insult them, but what I find, the whole point of this conversation, what I find interesting is that the only reason people are listening to this stuff from this guy, right? Two reasons: Space Force and MIT, right? If anybody, take them out of the uniform, just, I went to, I don't know, I went to, UT Austin and I spent my time working on this degree. People might listen, but they're going to listen based on the content. And if they were promoting, self-promoting heavily through, kind of, rage farming, then they wouldn't get very far. So I think it's fairly obvious that the reason there's any credibility at all, it's not the ideas, because nobody's been able to really point to any idea that is very useful. It's this show, right? And appeal to authority, right? MIT's, they give degrees and it's a degree, right? It's academic and no peer review. And I don't know anybody. I don't know who was on the
All right.
what do you call it?
Okay, shall I attempt to sort of steel man his argument, and then sort of put forward a little bit of that, and then we'll see how we go from there.
Sure.
I think his underlying thesis is that the idea is that you cannot countervail nuclear states. So, like one nuclear state, if you launch nukes at another state, who's going to launch nukes back at you? Everything just gets destroyed, and from that perspective, we've reached the pinnacle of projecting kinetic joules of energy per second, so to say, or watts. And his I suppose his basic thesis is that you can sort of like just as the moose will grow antlers during mating season, and to assert no, let me steal.
I have seen this written, so
let me steel man his argument here. So just as the moose can grow these antlers, which are these these antlers, in order to assert dominance over the hierarchy of other moose. And then after the mating season is done, and they've already determined who's the top of the pecking order, the antlers would fall off. This is sort of like to prevent damage done to. I mean, damage is already done in many situations, but generally, on the whole, is to prevent damage to the organism. So I think his idea is that, well, we've determined that for the first time through proof of work, we're able to project joules of energy. I can impose a cost on another person in cyberspace in the form of proof of work. So if we speak a protocol, and if you are a bad actor in space, I can impose actual real world work on you by saying, okay, I will respond to your message if it has a certain amount of zeros in the hash. The hash.
That's Hashcash, by the way.
Okay. Yeah, that's Hashcash. That's exactly right. But I mean,
it's not proof of work. I mean, you could call Hashcash proof of work, but it's not Bitcoin proof of work. It's Hashcash.
Right. Okay. But can I say it's one form of proof of work has the whole Merkle tree and goes back.
It has. I mean, technically it's work. But what we're talking about is, let's be accurate with our comparisons, because it's not Bitcoin that he's talking about. He's talking about Hashcash. Right. I won't respond. If you want me to read your email, you have to have proved to me that you spent some money, period. Hashcash. Right.
Right.
That's it.
It's
right out of Adam's, description.
Yes. Okay. So Hashcash implementation. So I can actually get another entity who might be a bad actor to impose a real world work on them at minimal cost to myself. And as a result, his thoughts are like, well, okay, given, and now if you apply Hashcash to like the whole Merkle tree and you've got the Bitcoin thing, these little units of Satoshi that are created, this is all protected by proof of work and the difficulty adjustment and whatnot.
It's not all protected by proof of work. I don't want to. I know you're trying to steal me the argument, but it's just one error after another.
Okay. Okay, but we can go into this. Let's dismantle this. But
is there more? I didn't want to cut you off. Is there more to it?
Yeah, and basically his thoughts are like, we can escalate, and maybe this is where the physics envy, or rather the kinetic power projection envy of the other branches of the
mission envy.
Yeah, mission envy. All right, okay.
We don't have a mission. We need one.
Yeah, a solution looking for a problem, right? And he's sort of like, saying, well, this is a domain that Space Force can become a dominant in, and we can do this. We can actually, ramp up hash, Bitcoin mining facilities to secure Bitcoin in this sort of fashion, and maybe it's much ado about nothing. But let's dismantle these.
So have you read the thesis?
I have the thesis actually, but I'm also sort of going through it.
Sorry? So you have permission to complain? You have permission to critique it because you spent the money?
Yeah. No, I spent the money. I've gotten through it, but then after a while, I was just like, dude, this is just like, just sum it up, please, man. This is like, stuff's going on and on and on.
So another one of the annoyances, right? For me, if you've read anything that I've written, you would understand. I try to take the very fewest possible number of words to make a point.
And I appreciate that, dude.
And my biggest complaint, people's biggest complaint about me is I don't use enough words. They don't know what I'm talking about. Right?
But that's why I like your writing, because it is so succinct. It's so to the point that you have this basic thing, and I have to do work. I have to do work to understand what you say. Yeah. And that work is like, it could be a lot of work, eh? And I like that.
You're going to do a lot less. You're going to invest a lot less time in trying to understand, say, one of the chapters in crypto economics than you would by reading 500 pages of stuff you don't understand and you can't find the point, right? Like, so people look at it as like, it took me so much time to figure it out. Well, I'm like, yeah, but you knew what you were trying to figure out, right? You're just trying to. I modeled it after. I kind of modeled the way I did those things after Rothbard. I really appreciated. Yeah. Man Economy of State is a big freaking book, right? Yes, and with power markets, big. But he does, it's more of a reasonable book than mine. But he has a point, and he goes through the proof of the point in most cases. And I took the time to read that like 1 or 2 pages a day, and to go through in my head and make sure I could actually verify that proof myself based on what I had verified, in the past. And I worked through the entire book like that. And that's kind of how I thought about writing about economics. And, in most cases, I was comfortable with my ability to do that. In some cases, I think he's kind of full of crap, but in the kind of the fundamentals of economics and just explaining these things, I didn't need a history lesson. I didn't need to, there's a lot of footnotes. You can read all about who came up with this idea and why and who they were arguing with and all this stuff and all the bad things that people do, blah, 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 blah. But I just wanted to understand the theory and how it worked. And he did a really good job of making that concise. And then, power and market goes into the whole politics of it and everything like that. But so when I see somebody who has an idea, they claim to have a concrete idea that they want to put forth and have people critique. I appreciate seeing that idea stated as concisely as possible. And if somebody can't do that and they put way too many words around it, to me, that's scammery, right? They're just trying to hide the fact there's no real idea there.
Yeah.
Or it's just, poor editing. I don't know what. But what you presented to me, right, was the idea that the military can use Hashcash as a power protection technique. And to me, and that's all I've heard anywhere else. Okay, so I don't need to read 500 pages to know that's nonsense. I don't need to spend the money. I mean, I'm not that cheap. I'd spend the money, but I just I can't even justify it. Like, why would I do that versus buying a book on, like motorcycle and, maintenance, which I'd much rather read, get a fresh copy of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance or something like that. Or buy a book, or, on the CB750 or something. I've only got 3 of those. But this, like, okay, so, well, if it's not that interesting, then why am I end up talking about it so much? Because people keep asking me about it, and because I see this nonsense, and when I see nonsense tweets that a lot of people are like forwarding, and I tend to comment on them, and then that becomes something. But yeah, okay, so this idea that this term power projection in military terminology means something. It has a military. It's a concept we use, especially the Navy. Right, probably the Air Force to some extent too, but the Navy's mission is power projection. Right, we take the power, we build it here, we train it here, and we send it to your place. Right, if we're not too happy about what's going on in Taiwan, we project some power in the form of a couple carrier battle groups. Right, and I've been on a few carriers. I cruised a couple times in the Med. When an aircraft carrier from the United States Navy pulls up to your pier, people freak the fuck out. I mean, like, they're excited. They're like, they've never seen anything like it. And I did this in Spain. I did it in Italy. Did it in Greece. Lines of people down the pier, down the street. I was in trouble one time. I had to spend the whole port call on the ship. I wasn't able to leave. I was in Hack, and I voluntarily took everybody's duty in my squadron during that period because I couldn't leave the ship anyway. And the duty was largely giving tours to people. And so I gave tours to thousands and thousands of people in Valencia. And, just going out on the pier and standing and looking up at the carrier over your head as it hangs over the pier, right? Because it's so canted out. And these people just standing up and looking at us like, these fucking Americans, like, they left Europe like a couple hundred years ago and now they're back with this shit. What the fuck? Like, it just gives you the feeling. It's hard to explain to somebody, but when you're a military guy on that ship and you pull up to the pier, it's like, we're back. That's what it feels like, based on the reaction that everybody has. Like, yeah, we're freaking back. And so that's power projection, right? Like, when that thing's there, you start to think twice about what you can actually do to counter it. And one of those ships is comparable to the Air Force in the vast majority of European countries. And so it is what it is. It's kind of interesting if you're into aviation and military stuff, whatever, but that's real power projection. Now, so the Air Force, they can send bombers around the world, right? That's power projection. I've done training missions where, we're out in the freaking desert in the U.S. somewhere, and a bomber shows up on time, on target, in the middle of the night. Nobody saw him coming or leaving, but something blew up in the desert that was supposed to blow up at the very second it was supposed to blow up, and this guy came from halfway around the world. Right? That's power projection. Like, where'd that come from? And so, Air Force does power projection. Army, not as much. It's a different type of mission. So. A point I'm trying to make is it has a meaning. Like, this idea of power projection means we get in your face, right? We can show up where you don't want us to be. We can send a submarine up your river, and be right downtown. And you wouldn't even know it, right? We have ways of doing these crazy things, and you can speculate about all the crazy things we do. We probably do them. If it's humanly possible, it's probably done. And compare that, so in that context, when you use the term power projection to refer to making somebody do some hash cash before they send you an email, it's ludicrous, right? It's not even a good analogy. It's not power projection, right? It's what are you projecting and what are you stopping? It's an anti-spam technique, right? If you don't want to read somebody's email, then don't read it, right? If you're getting email from, I don't know, like the Chinese are sending email to the Brits, and the Brits don't want their email, then delete it. What do they care? How can this possibly be considered power projection?
Well, let's look at it from against sort of trying to steel man his argument. In the form of, well, you take Hashcash and then you apply it to the Bitcoin, and then you add the Merkle tree and the difficulty adjustment. Then you've got
money. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
We got money.
And this money has the potential of being more secure than almost any form of money that has ever existed. Well,
we can secure money. So can everybody else using Bitcoin to a certain extent. Okay, how's that power projection?
Well, no, in the sense that anybody who attacks Bitcoin needs to launch a dishonest majority attack against Bitcoin, and then that in itself will according to using the words, is like using an energy weapon on the wallet.
Okay, so what part of the world, what world governments care about Bitcoin being attacked? No, they don't.
El Salvador at the moment. Maybe more countries as they sort of come onto the Bitcoin standard.
So I don't know. China and all its mining power decides to put all that power into a 51% attack. Why doesn't America do? Why does the U.S. Army, Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps give a shit? Where's the power being projected?
Okay, so assume for a second that at this point a large percentage of the U.S. Populace, the government and whatnot, have decided that actually storing your value in Bitcoin is a good idea.
Okay, because you started with the word "let's assume." Okay,
yes, no. I mean, it's right? Maybe that's not the case.
We're going to make assumptions.
Okay.
And build our whole argument on those assumptions. Right, the assumptions are the problem. The whole idea is if our entire financial system somehow became dependent on Bitcoin, right? That's the argument.
Yes.
And it's not like I wasn't aware of this.
Let's go with it. Yeah.
I'm being a little bit facetious. Okay, it's not Hashcash. It's not just money. It's not just Bitcoin. What is it? It's the U.S. If you're the American, right? It's the United States financial system is now crippleable if somebody can 51% attack Bitcoin. That's the argument.
Right. Okay. Let's.
If the U.S. financial system is not crippleable by attacking Bitcoin, there is no argument. Let's draw a clear line here, right? If that is not the case, there is no thing to defend that the U.S. government or its military cares about. In fact, they probably care more about doing exactly what that attacker is doing, which is preventing, because remember, this is the under assumption, we have not adopted it as a government currency, right? Yes. We're trying to stop people from adopting it because it subverts our currency, which is, by the way, it exists, the reason it exists. So let's be clear. Either the United States government, the entire United States financial system has become dependent on Bitcoin, or they're on the same side as the guy who's attacking it, one or the other, right? And it's either one of it. So if you accept that assumption that the United States government will inevitably become dependent on Bitcoin, then you might see it as a critical aspect of military Space Force defense, that you defend Bitcoin against all 51% attacks. But this, by the way, has nothing to do with Hashcash. It has nothing to do with protecting your systems, your machines, or anything like that from attack. This just has to do with making sure that somebody cannot censor Bitcoin.
Yes.
So it's you can strip away all the bullshit in this argument and say, look, we understand this problem already. There's nothing new here. This is a question of whether somebody, what impact a 51% attack can have. There's nothing new in that. Satoshi laid that out in a freaking white paper, right? And there's two things that are relevant to 51% here. And of course, the educated reader here knows we mean majority, not 51. Majority hash power eventually wins a conflict, right? Where one majority miner is not mining on other people's blocks. Eventually that miner's chain will always be the long chain, eventually, right? So that's 51% attack means using that capability temporarily to steal something that you bought with Bitcoin and then taking your Bitcoin back. It's like a Finney attack with a guarantee, right? So there's a range of there's a spectrum of attacks that are based on reversing transactions from one block like a Finney attack all the way up to perpetual kind of 51% attack. Those are called attacks because you're stealing money. You're stealing from people, right? Majority hash power censoring is not an attack. It's not, there's no stealing going on. People are just, I can choose to mine on somebody's blocks if I want to or not, and I can choose to mine whatever transactions I want. That's how Bitcoin works. It's not an attack, right? we tend to refer to it as an attack, but that's conflating two problems. So I'm just pointing out.
It's good you do that. Yes.
These are well understood, well documented in my book anyway. And Satoshi described the 51% attack. And I'm absolutely certain he understood censorship as a different type of problem, which is probably more insidious than a 51% attack. 51% attack, you look like it's expensive. Eventually you're going to lose the attack if you can't sustain it. And that's going to be a problem for you. So it's really, there's a big disincentive kind of financially for that to happen, but people tended to focus entirely on that as a market incentive, a market force, which is there, and not see the anti-market force, which Bitcoin is designed to avoid, right? Bitcoin is designed to allow people to avoid state money and the cost of using it, the tax on state money, seigniorage and privacy, right? Those two aspects of the way states tax through money. Well, okay, if that's the value proposition, which it is, which makes, that's what Bitcoin provides that other electronic monies don't provide, then the threat is the state. And if the threat is the state, it's not about stealing, the bicycle they just sold you or something. It's about preventing you from using the money because they want to preserve the value proposition that they have in their own money in seigniorage, which all countries except for El Salvador and maybe 3 or 4 others that are too small to kind of manage their own printing or just don't want to, they all engage it. It's a form of taxation, that's very profitable because they have monopoly control over the production of the money, and they use other laws to ensure the primacy of that money in their domain, and they profit from that monopoly. And so if you can monopolize Bitcoin production, you can do the same thing. Right? It's not really that hard. If you can get majority hash power, you can monopolize Bitcoin production. You can charge everybody anything you want to get their transaction confirmed, up to their willingness to pay. You can demand an ID approval, right? You can demand to know who they're transacting with. Tell me who. I'm not going to, let this transaction get confirmed unless you tell me what it's for. Prove it to me. That's the way the existing financial system works. You need identity to transact electronically. You need approval from the state ultimately, and it's a monopoly control. It's because of that monopoly control. That's not required in gold. It's not required in cash currency, paper currency, coinage, and it's not required in Bitcoin, as long as you can keep it out of majority control. As soon as you monopolize it, you get a problem. And so, what new idea is being presented here? The idea that some entity, I don't know, the commies, the Oceania, is going to mine the crap out of Bitcoin in order to gain majority hash power, control over it, therefore being able to charge people a fee, seigniorage. Essentially, it's demurrage, but we could call it the equivalent of seigniorage, and demand identity in order to transact, which is basically state money. So they're going to turn Bitcoin into their state money, and if they can sustain that, then nobody is going to use it eventually because it no longer has a value proposition. So people just, would eventually presumably stop using it. Again, I'm kind of talking about the novelty of the idea. There's nothing new.
Right.
It's not a novel idea. Yes, if the United States, made a major, investment as a government in its financial system on Bitcoin, then the entire financial system would be at risk to that type of hash power attack. If it doesn't, there's no such benefit. In other words, there would be absolutely no reason for the U.S. Space Force to start mining the crap out of Bitcoin if there's no dependency of the financial system on Bitcoin. That looks to me and to, I think, other people as a bit of a sham, right? It's a cover. You could look at that as a cover story. Really, my interest as a major world government with the strongest taxing power through my currency of any in the world, and the biggest single source. So, like this year, the budget deficit in the United States is bigger than any single income item, like personal income tax, other taxes, corporate income taxes, fees, things like that. It's bigger, and it's bigger than the interest on the debt. Even it's the biggest income item. Sorry, the biggest expense item. Sorry, the deficit is bigger than any income item. And what is the deficit? It's a picture of seigniorage, right? All that money is going to be printed to pay for the deficit and then lent back. So, or by the printer. And so Fed buys it from the Treasury for nothing. Fed uses it to buy treasuries, at face value. And then when there's more, they print more, right? When there's a need for more, they print more. So it's a very good proxy for what's the current value, the annual value of seigniorage in the US. And it's the biggest single income item, if you look at it that way, which I think is there's a little bit of guesstimation going on, but it's a fair approximation of how important it is to be able to do that. And if the United States government decided it is really just going all in on Bitcoin, and we're going to help the people do the Bitcoin thing, and we're going to be, we're not going to majority control it ourselves, right? Because we believe in true Bitcoin. We're not going to just majority hash power control it and censor, do all the things we do with our existing current financial system. We're giving up on all that. We don't care what people do with their money. We believe in privacy, and we believe that people should be able to avoid seigniorage. And so we're going to go all in on Bitcoin, and we're going to give up the single largest income source we have because we're good guys. Okay, that is one possibility. The other possibility is they go, fuck no, we're going to build a big bunch of mines just in case people start circumventing our currency to the extent that we are losing our biggest revenue source. That's the other possibility. Now, if you're looking at government actors getting a degree from a government-funded institution coming at you saying, I want to mine the shit out of Bitcoin for self-defense reasons, when there's literally nothing to defend from that perspective, right? Or maybe, maybe the story is, I really want to build a big-ass mine, and I want all you guys to support me in this effort, right? So that we can censor the shit out of Bitcoin, right? And maintain our financial system, which does pay for the military, which does, which of these ideas is credible? I'm sorry, I get too animated about this.
No, probably the latter, which leads me to the question I wanted to ask you a little bit earlier, but I thought it was not the right time, but maybe this is a good segue. Okay. The fleets of Navy that patrol the high seas ensure that people are able to trade on an international platform, and
so going on. It's in our self-interest to
hang about. So yeah, and we're able to trade internationally because the U.S. Navy is securing the cargo, the ships, and whatnot.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, in a scenario where assume that Bitcoin is now the major international reserve currency of the world, how is Bitcoin going to pay for those fleets of ships?
Bitcoin's not going to.
It's not going to, exactly. So as a result, we're going to have more pirates come onto the high seas.
That's a non sequitur. That doesn't follow. Right?
Okay.
It doesn't. The world hasn't been like drowning in.
Oh shit! Have we? I think I might have lost
Navy,
you.
right?
Can you repeat that? I think I lost you for a second. The world has not been drowning.
It's just it doesn't follow that without the dollar seigniorage tax paying for the United States Navy to secure the sea lanes around the world, which is done, that the world would just be overtaken by pirates. I mean, you can make the same argument, be overtaken by dictators and all this. There's plenty of arguments there you could be made, but the reality is that the United States Navy and military government has taken over the military responsibilities of large portions of the world ever since World War II, because it's been kind of this, take Europe, for example. Americans pay for it or we pay for it. Let's let the Americans pay for it. We'll pay their inflation tax, right? Okay, so say the Americans aren't doing it anymore. Well, then somebody else is going to do it. They're still paying for it one way or the other. It's not like, Europe never had navies to defend sea lanes. It's just that they, partner with the Americans to do it. And there's a lot of European navies out there that are doing these same things. The U.S. tends to lead and has the budget of all the other militaries of the world put together, and probably the capabilities as well. But that doesn't imply that if, we don't have the dollar tax anymore. There's no more order in the world. If governments don't take up civil order, then individuals do, right? And this happens already when you have ships going around the world that aren't getting enough protection. They hire contract military, and they protect themselves.
Yes. Yeah. So no, I agree with what you're saying, but it becomes more efficient. In other words, it becomes more efficient for these states, these other countries, to say, okay, let's just delegate the responsibility to the United States Navy. But as a result of that, the side effect is that the US dollar now becomes the international reserve currency of the world.
No, I think it's not really happening in that order. It didn't happen in that order. I mean, the
natural side effect of that is
the pound was the world's reserve currency in gold up until World War II.
Well, that's when the British controlled the high seas,
right? And the British England essentially collapsed to themselves and Hitler, right?
Well, after World War II, after they sold all their gold to the US, right?
Well, I mean, so England fell to World War II, right? Not prepared enough, not ready enough, whatever. Yes. Took it easy during the inner years. Who knows? I don't know. But for some reason, right? But the United States stepped in, not because of dollar primacy. That happened as a consequence of the United States militarily stepping in and solving this catastrophe in Europe. At the point, after the war was over, the Marshall Plan was U.S. taxpayers rebuilding Europe and then also rebuilding all of Japan, right, yes, and providing all of their defense for decades, right, yes, like half a century, yes, and that's just not getting phased out. But it is slowly getting phased out. Eventually, it'll all be phased out. But it's we still have bases in Japan, we still have bases in Germany as a consequence of the war. And the fact that, we were economically strong enough to help Europe win the war, right? And the economic base of the United States is what made that happen, not the dollar, right? The dollar doesn't make anything. And the productive capability, right? The industrial productive capability of the United States made that happen. And as a consequence, everybody was so poor in the end that who's going to support the currency, right? The monetary system. They also let the Americans do it. They've got all the power, right? They should be doing it. And then so it's still that way. Maybe it'll be that way for longer. Maybe it won't. Doesn't really matter to me. But this really doesn't have. It's not like the things that states do aren't going to still be done by states. They will. There's a long history of states, kind of protecting trade. Individual states will protect trade because trade benefits them and it benefits both sides. But by benefiting both sides, it benefits me, right? So if I protect the road, I provide security on my road, then people will come trade with me. That benefits me. Maybe they want to pay for it. Maybe they don't. I'm still going to pay for it.
Okay.
So Bitcoin, I don't like. I thought initially you were going to make the argument that the U.S., kind of selflessly patrols the world because it's in its own interest. It's not really selfless, right? Because we trade with everybody, and so we want to make sure that trade stays open. And this, right? It's probably a good argument there. And therefore, wouldn't the U.S. want to encourage Bitcoin as a money that facilitates trade around the world from remaining out of majority control, right? Not being under control of somebody with majority hash power, to encourage free trade around the world, right? Maybe it would, but that's okay. Now we're delving into like what's in somebody's mind. These aren't the technical capabilities. These aren't secure. We're asking ourselves to question whether it is more in the interest of a major world government to give up seigniorage and embrace Bitcoin. And we're talking ultimately about the United States and Europe, or Europe, right? Or to suppress it to the extent where it doesn't harm their seigniorage revenues materially.
Yeah, it becomes a KYC thing, right? Yeah, I think that's definitely no. Okay, so first of all, the whole high seas, a U.S. military patrolling the season as a consequence, the U.S. dollar becomes the international reserve currency of the world. That was just a hypothesis I wanted to sort of bounce off you. And in the scenario, if Bitcoin becomes that, how would okay, states would just do it themselves. But yes, in the sense that states mining Bitcoin, especially like the United States, mining Bitcoin so that they're able to maintain their tax and whatnot, and to do surveillance as well as a permissioned usage of the blockchain, sounds more of a more feasible attack vector. Do you think the more nefarious side of this Space Force type endeavor could lead to that sort of thing? And if so, yeah, I mean, well, do you think that could be like the preambles of it?
So I mean, probably the simplest answer is this is some guy, well-meaning, into, younger guy in another generation than me, into Bitcoin, right? And so it's very common, you get to a certain point in your military career, go off to college, get an advanced degree. Great move if you're going to get out someday, which, if you don't have a warfare specialty, I mean, probably a better career move to get out, right? They don't pay that well. And if you're not flying jets off of boats, it's not that much fun. So, okay. So getting a degree makes sense. So to me, the simplest explanation is some guy who has an interest, has this job, he's kind of an engineering type, get the Air Force to pay for me, get a degree, go to MIT, good name, write up this, big tome. Don't really have
hate farm
idea, but if I write enough and I give enough history and I, wave my hands around enough, people are going to think it's awesome. And maybe I think it's awesome. And that's just it. I'm so, I'm convinced I did a really good job here, and I want to get the word out. I want to become well known. I want to become an expert in this field. To me, that's the most plausible answer. Okay.
Much ado about nothing.
To be absolutely honest, I'm not much of a conspiracy guy.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I just wanted to know, do you think that could be a potential incentive or what's the word? In a potential vector? And I agree. I agree with you. That is the most likely the scenario, and in that it is much ado about nothing.
I think it is much ado about nothing, but the problem with these things that are about nothing is they tend to have consequences in terms of what people really do and how it directs their activity. And I take you back to the rainbow chart, stock to flow, and time preference nonsense, right? Where I'll give you one example. There was a guy that I knew, met him in Hong Kong at scaling. So it was way back. And I had known of him. He's a well-known Bitcoin guy. He passed a few years back, unfortunately. But before he did, like the year before he did, which I didn't know anything about it, right? I didn't know he was still. But one of the last things he worked on was a risk-free rate of return scenario. And it was based on a lot of these concepts, which I had spent a good amount of time debunking. And, a lot of time and effort went into this. It was, kind of going to become a soft fork proposal. There was a very formal paper written up. There were people that were into it. So it went public on Bitcoin Dev. I started critiquing it right off the bat as soon as I saw it. And after there was a lot of back and forth for a while, and then it went quiet and never heard anything about it. And then later,
is that the one where you can pull back a loan?
Yeah, covenants. It was based on a covenant that would allow you to recover lend some money, and then at the end of the term of the loan, you recover the money. Okay, so to me, like ludicrous right from the start. But this is the thing, that there was like economists who wrote books, talking about these ideas that really, gets, all this talk about fractional reserve banking and time preference and hodling as value producing, right? It's all bullshit. And these narratives drive so much activity in Bitcoin. And, honestly, I can't remember who it was, but there was somebody contacted me, or I think I was just in a casual conversation with somebody on a trip somewhere. And it turned out he was one of the people that had worked on this project. And I hadn't heard anything about it. I hadn't heard what happened. I just knew it kind of went quiet and didn't go anywhere. And he told me flat out, like, we listened, right? Like they sat down and they took it to heart, and they were like, he's right.
Yeah.
Shut it down. And that made me feel really good. I didn't feel really good that I, destroyed somebody's dreams, especially right before he passed away. But I felt really good that I saved them from wasting all that time.
Well,
I didn't need I never mentioned it anywhere. Now I feel
actually you did. You mentioned on the previous podcast, with me. You mentioned that. But the thing is that
what was the previous
with me, the first podcast I had with you, you mentioned this specific thing.
But the resolution of it, I hadn't known.
Oh no, you didn't mention the resolution.
That until,
That's
I think
right,
I may have made a passing reference to it on a podcast I've done recently, but I just found out like within the last year. I can't remember where it was. I found out. My memory's not good, but somebody told me. I'm like, okay, well, yeah, okay. I'm glad that helped. There was another scenario though. Yeah, so that was way back, right? I didn't find out until recently. Okay. There was another one. Something very similar happened. It was who's the guy that did BitTorrent? I was forget his name.
Bram Cohen.
Bram Cohen, yeah. So Bram Cohen had Chia, right? You remember Chia?
Yes. Yeah. Oh God, fuck.
Where's Chia? Right, the greening of the world. We're gonna do a green Bitcoin
and make fucking a shitload of hard drives that fucking do e-waste and all that shit.
Okay, but you're stealing my.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I
did I just deflate your balloon? Okay. I retract. Keep going.
There were like 15 PhDs and like $100 million in investment money went into Chia, and they made this big white paper. It was a lot of Greek letters that I don't understand, and I was just like, I'm scanning through this thing. I can't. But right when it came out, I was like, Bram Cohen's a good guy. He's got solid reputation in space. He's doing something. This also happened. Something similar happened with David Chaum. Like Bram Cohen, David Chaum, these guys are like predecessors to Bitcoin, right? This important stuff that they did. Anyway, so I had a lot of respect for the guy, but I was like, this doesn't add up to me. And I thought about it. I said, why is this wrong? And then I realized, it's the infinite production of hard drives. Yeah. And it was one of the things that fed on early into my wiki, which became my book. So most of my book was based on having an uneasy feeling about something that somebody said publicly and becoming like a thing, and me critiquing it and having to really iron out my critique so I could make a credible critique, right, publicly. And sometimes they weren't great, but over time I fixed it. I figure out, okay, now I have the right answer to this problem. But for some reason I have the ability, like in my gut, to know there's something wrong right off the bat. And it's just my principles of free markets and basic economic theory, right? Those are principles. They don't bend.
It just cuts right through to the core.
Well, if you believe in a principle, it doesn't bend to some new idea. Yeah, it's a principle. It holds always. Yeah. And when somebody comes up and says, no, risk-free rate of return, I'm like, well, that doesn't add up, right? Something's wrong. Or we're going to make basically, we're going to make Bitcoin mining free. Right? We save the world. We're not going to consume any energy. And I didn't know. It took me a little bit of thinking to figure out what was wrong with it. Like, how would I prove economically this is wrong? But as soon as it occurred to me, I'm like, that's it, right? You have to consume the full block reward in terms of monetary expense, or you're making infinite profit, and competition's going to come in and take some of that profit. And that competition needs hard drive space. They're going to manufacture hard drives till the cows come home. And guess what happened in that case? The same thing. But it wasn't the same thing. I had two debates like a year apart with Bram on Twitter, and I think the second time he blocked me. The first time I was going to Honey Badger like right after. It was like the second Honey Badger. I've gone to all of them. I spoke, and I was there. I was talking to a bunch of people about it. It had just come out, and I'm telling them all my thoughts on it. I'm like, and so there was these discussions, and then I wrote a topic about it, and that was it. Just went away, and you see things about Chia here now and then. And then I got a private message years later, like maybe 3 years later, 4 years later, from one of the big heads who was working on this project. And basically it was, we finally figured out you were right. You're right. And we're pivoting, we're going to try to do proof of work, proof of stake. I'm like, okay, well, that's novel. Why don't you go read my topic on proof of stake? And so, but tens of millions of dollars, years of people's lives on this thing, which was obviously flawed. Yeah. And so back to the original point, right? Why do I speak up when I see these things? Because I feel like I can do some good, right? Yeah. Like if nobody else is saying anything, I'm not afraid to say it, right? Like I'm not afraid to say to Bram Cohen, again, guy with a lot of credibility, awesome. Not many people are going to want to question that. Yeah. But or Adam Back, for example. I argue with Adam plenty of times, and people just don't want to do that. I don't care. I'm secure in my own position in life. I don't need anything from anyone, and I'm just here for the lulls, I guess. I'm here to advance the cause of human liberty, and I don't care about the casino. I don't get too hot and bothered about shit coins. People do what they want with their own stuff. I'm not into fraud, but I just want to keep Bitcoin moving forward in a way that advances the cause of human liberty around the world. And I know that Bitcoin today and for many years has helped a lot of people around the world. And that's good enough for me. I don't fantasize about hyper Bitcoinization, and the United States government backing the US dollar with Bitcoins. That was the premise of the Bitcoin standard, no matter what anybody will tell you, and no matter what the retelling of that story, the backtracking is. I had those debates on Twitter when it first came out for the same reasons. This was Hal Finney's idea.
Yeah.
Hal Finney was the very first person to say, yeah, we could back the dollar with it. We could back our entire massive financial system with Bitcoin, and wouldn't that be awesome? That's how we'll scale it. That was the idea of the Bitcoin standard. It's the gold standard with Bitcoin, right? It's pretty trivial. Yeah. And it wasn't a new idea. And so here we are with Spaceboy. Not a new idea. Yes, there can be hash power conflicts, and people getting all excited about the United States military building a big ass hash farm, to me sounds a little counterproductive, right? It's really exactly the opposite of what you want to encourage. And never mind the fact that this whole position is based on the primacy of the United States government, right? I don't know why a Aussie or a South African or Afrikaner.
No, with a surname Mackenzie, Scottish ancestry.
Yeah, okay. I don't know why a Scot from South Africa would care, to encourage the United States government to get enough hash power to majority, to defeat a majority hash power attack, which means you have majority hash power.
No, it's not that I care. I do care about the same reason as you do, which is like encouraging the liberty to the individual. But the point is that I have a lot of respect for you and your work. And when I see your feathers get ruffled, I want to get to the root of that. And I think you got
to the root of it.
Yes, Yes, I did. I think
you're not the first one to ask, and I think you've probably gotten closer to the root of it than any conversations I've had so far. But the reason my feathers are ruffled are the same reasons with Chia, with risk-free rate of return, with Bitcoin standard, with 100 trillion rainbow charts, with all that bullshit, right? This is all distractions from Bitcoin. Yes, it does drive interest, and people get all excited and they love the money, number go up and all this stuff. Yeah. But that's why, because all of those are major narratives that are absolutely fucking pointless when it comes to
yes. But also
and imagine how much energy could be directed in the right way so people could see that.
Exactly. Which also I was having a discussion with a mate here in Hong Kong who just interviewed you a couple of days ago, actually. Yeah, and
Hong Kong Mafia's got my number.
You better watch out, man. You better watch out. And the thing is, like I was just speaking, it's like the eternal September, as I bring it up earlier, is that like groups of people come in, maybe they come in for different reasons, but chatting to you it's like puts a focal point on the original the fundamental the fundamentals of Bitcoin, in essence of like what the threat model is, what the threat actors are, of the importance, the rationale, and all that stuff behind it. And I think it's important. I think it's important to sort of like realign every time, every now and again, to refocus everybody and say, yeah, okay, this stuff is not that important. It's a bunch of buzz at the moment, and what you're doing, what you're focusing
NFTs.
on. Woo. Yeah, good fun. I mean,
some of these things are so ludicrous. I don't burn any time on them, right? Like NFTs, ICOs. I spent very little time on those. That didn't get my feathers ruffled because it was such obviously nonsense that most people that I knew weren't even going to give it a second thought.
Yes.
But yeah, so people, people tend to lose track. First of all, you start a company, you raise money, you have pressure. I understand that pressure very well. Mm-hmm. And you have to produce, you have to make something that makes money. If you're running your own business, you're, podcasting or whatever, right? You're like one of these people, there's a lot of self-promotion around Bitcoin, write a book, cheerleading Bitcoin, right? You can very easily get wrapped up in the fact that this is, how you're surviving. I can detach myself from that because it's not how I'm surviving. I came into Bitcoin retired, with three companies under my belt and, decades, I don't know.
Fortunately, I'm in the same position
40
as
years
you.
of programming, experience and a military, career. And, I just didn't, to me, none of that. So I'm somewhat, I have a position that allows me to the luxury of stepping back and critiquing things that other people either can't or can't see because it's too close to them. But I gravitated towards Amir right off the bat when I saw Bitcoin and his perspective on it took a little while for me to come to understand, but I did come to understand it. And I think people need to be reminded of that because most people that I talk to that are, I consider earnest Bitcoiners like yourself, they're here for the same reasons.
Yeah.
But all this stuff, just like, it's like there needs to be all this stuff or it's not successful. I remember Amir telling me,
you're right.
I remember Amir telling me like, fucking 8 years ago. He's like, Bitcoin's already successful.
Yes.
I just bought some weed with it or something. I don't know, but like, it's already successful. It's doing what it's supposed to do. It's a huge success.
It is.
What are you after? Oh, we're after governments embracing it. Okay, that's why you go get a photo op with El Dictador, right? Which I actually turned down. Was there for a conference and got an invite to go to the thing, and he seems like a perfectly nice guy. I just I don't do photo ops with world leaders. Because it's kind of counter brand for me, right? It's and you never know who's what that photo's get. There was a photo with Queen Elizabeth as a little girl giving a Nazi salute. It didn't go over too well later in life.
Oh my God, I didn't know that.
And what's his name? One of the most famous
Epstein.
No, we're going way back.
Okay.
At the time, the most famous person on the planet, Charles Lindbergh.
Yes.
Was the most famous person on the planet by any objective measure, most recognizable name, face. And what did he do? He went to some island of Dr. Moreau in the Med and did eugenics research for the Nazis. Like, man, it's at least a break even at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I just, I try not to associate myself with things that might go south.
Yeah. Well, I do always take heed to the lesson my parents taught me, which was never judge a previous generation by today's standards, right? It's something you should not do.
Yeah, but there, it doesn't take a lot of studying of history to know that,
there's a lot of experiments that went south.
Cozying up to I don't want to insult El Salvador with the Banana Republic brand, but it generally kind of falls into the category. Small kind of Latin American country leader.
What's your opinion on that? Can we open that chapter?
Who managed to circumvent his own term limits in order to mine Bitcoin with a
But let's open up on that chapter, because there's another bunch of hoo-ha that's going on over there. What's your opinion on that? But I want to turn on my fan for a second. Should we take a bit of a bathroom break?
Yeah, I could use a break. I'll be right back.
Okay, let me press pause. All right. And we're live. Okay, so much relieved after all that. Let's open up the El Salvador. What's your opinion on what's going on in El Salvador and all of that? Is there much ado about nothing going on there, or what's your opinion? Is there much to talk about there? Do you have any opinions on it? If not, we can go on to another subject.
So I went down there, did a panel. I travel a lot, so I went as much for the travel as anything. Plus,
I'm
only
sure.
got out there on the COVID, but So I just want to point out that I actually have been there, but I've been to 90 countries, so it doesn't
really count.
surprise anybody. But as far as what's going on there, I mean, man, crime is way down.
Yeah.
Positive for a lot of people. Despite some very, kind of formally illiberal actions,
maybe it's required.
El Dictador is extremely popular, and I think the history is yet to be written on the whole thing in terms of the politics of it. I mean, I know people that grew up in El Salvador during the 70s, and even more recently. I mean, it was kind of sketch when I was there. It wasn't too long ago. Pretty much every business had at night or during the day, had a guy out front with a shotgun.
Jesus.
Yeah. I mean, any business had anything to protect it had some old guy holding a double barrel out front. It was kind of unnerving at times, but
so
also
even
makes you feel like, well, there's some people protecting their property here. It's probably a decent enough neighborhood.
So the smallest amounts of cash on the table have got a double barrel shotgun looking after it.
No, and
Jesus.
I'm just talking about walking from where the conference was, just around the neighborhood myself, right? Like with a friend of mine. It wasn't that far. We're talking like within a block or two.
Christ.
So this was the heart of the area. It's just the norm, right? So there was certainly a long way to go from what came before to where they are now, and that's probably a positive in a lot of ways, but it's kind of hard to say. I mean, people probably said that about other kind of similar events in Central America when I was younger, and didn't turn out so well in the end. That's actually kind of some of the reason for me being cautious.
Okay.
Look at how these things kind of tended to go over time. So I don't know. In many ways, it seems like people okay with whatever it takes to get them safe again, and maybe it stops at that. I try not to. I don't involve myself. I'm kind of anti-political.
All right. Okay.
And as far as Bitcoin goes, it's a non-event for me. It doesn't matter at all. State adoption of Bitcoin is just a non-event. Good, maybe good or bad for them, but in terms of advancing the cause of human liberty, non-event. It's kind of like all white market adoption. To me, it's not consequential. With maybe the side note that it does tend to drive interest, understanding, and maybe some capital towards work that needs to be done.
So beyond that, it's just a non-event, as you mentioned.
Yeah, what is Coinbase contributing to the cause of human liberty around the world? Nothing.
Yeah. But surely having a nexus of a place which is rooted in this sort of self-sovereignty type thing, where the monetary system is based on this hardcore sort of self-sovereign type, hard money type of thing, it's going to have huge knock-on effects in the sense that you can go from an typical African country which is rife with corruption and inflation and whatnot, and go to El Salvador, and you can sort of start to see transformational things like, for example, the crime.
I think it would be. Sorry, I want to interrupt. I think it would be a mistake to attribute anything that's happening in El Salvador to Bitcoin. He is cleaning house on the gangs. It has nothing to do with Bitcoin.
Okay.
I mean, I can't see any way to make a cause and effect relationship between what's happening there.
Okay.
So, maybe, the DRC, formally deciding to adopt Bitcoin would lead to the same, kind of security and safety of the people there. But it might just lead to a bunch of people getting, wrench attacked for their Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I mean, again, security is physical. This is So El Salvador is providing physical security for people. Maybe not quite as many guys out front of their stores with shotguns anymore. Bitcoin didn't do that. You know, I mean, economics matters. You gotta pay for security, right? But pretty much any country in the world can pay through normal taxation for its own security. It's just that they're all getting robbed blind by their what's it called?
Peacekeeping, the taxation.
By their protection racket.
Right, exactly. It's just another form of mafia.
Largely protection racket. You pay me and I'll keep you safe. And you have no choice. Right. And so if you run a protection racket, you can extract as much money as you want because you have all the power. So in most countries of the world, the protection racket bleeds everybody dry and people can't really defend themselves either, but protection racket doesn't care. And El Salvador presently, what you have is, a protection racket, which is not bleeding people as dry and actually providing some security. That's not Bitcoin. The capital exists in any country to do that. People are productive enough to secure themselves collectively, as long as they're not getting robbed by their security service. So I don't really see that. Bitcoin may be making the country, the government wealthier and therefore more able to provide these options. But if you look at it, if you just look at it on the surface, put yourself in Vukuli's shoes, right? Like, if he's really if he's really going to take on the supreme power in El Salvador, which is private individuals with guns, gangs, right? You're taking your life in your hands, no question about it. How many of these type of guys, different parts of the world have been executed to keep the racket going? And so typically what happens is they partner with the racket, even if they're good guys. And that was one of the knocks on Voskuil in the beginning, was that he did, in fact, go and meet with them and partnered with them. That, I think, is well established. The question is what comes next, right? You go to Colombia, for example. The ceasefire, I did a motorcycle trip all through Colombia, and I went right through the center of some place I probably shouldn't have been, in the forest, but didn't know it until I got back. And
I'm glad you're still alive.
No, I guess met some Colombians like, you went where?
You madman.
So yeah, up in the mountains where there's coffee beans up there, right?
Only coffee beans. Only coffee beans, Eric. None of that sort of cocaine.
Did a big kind of oval route from Bogota to Medellin.
You madman.
And so Cali, we went
right in the Cali cartel's heartland.
Yeah, we actually went to who's the big famous drug lord from Colombia?
The guy who got shot on the rooftop, right? What's
the one
name?
they made the TV series about?
No, I'm thinking of El Pacino. What else? Oh, fuck's sake, what is it? I'm sure all the whole audience is busy thinking.
I know why. You can fill in. You can edit it in later.
Yes.
But I went to where they had arrested him for a period of time, and they had this compound where he stayed, which is like a prison. And I went there and walked around the whole thing. It was kind of interesting.
Oh, in the television series, the one where he's sort of smoking his cigar and
Pablo Escobar.
That's the one, Escobar.
Right? They would largely be partnered with the state, right? And the state would have to kind of show some enforcement in order to get the U.S. to throw them some money for enforcement and all this stuff. But
right.
So a point I was trying to make is in that position, if you're really going up against them, you're not partnering with them, and you're going to make the streets safe for kids to play soccer, football. But it's a risk. It's a real risk, and people in those positions, it's got to the paranoia has to creep in you would know, right?
Yeah.
And so from a human perspective, him in that position doing what he appears to be doing right now, that takes some balls, right? And but also looking at history, people who have been in those positions, he's got he extended his term limits. He kind of sort of threatened the legislature. He's kind of really kind of done a dragnet type of sweep, which, these things you could argue they were necessary, right? Things are out of control. But people who've had that kind of power tend to not want to give it up.
Yeah, it goes to the head.
And tend to kind of, slide into darkness over time.
What's the word? Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Absolutely. Yes. and that's, that's the unfortunate tale of so many Latin American countries.
Right.
And,
so with all these Bitcoiners moving out to El Salvador, it's just like plus 10 years. Oh shit, that was a bad mistake.
Yeah, so you can imagine like me exercising a little caution with,
of course. But that's why I said
I lived through the 70s. I know about all the black ops that were going on in Latin America, all over the place, right? Like, it was unbelievable, just nonstop mayhem. And
Nicaragua, all that sort of stuff.
Everywhere. Argentina, Peru, yes. Chile, Nicaragua, Panama, Colombia, Cuba, Haiti. There's just no end to it, right? You can name pretty much. Mexico. That's not Central America, by the way. But most Americans think Mexico is in South America, and if they're really smart, they think it's in Central America.
Okay, but it's Northern America.
But anything south of the United States is South America.
Yeah.
To most Americans.
Yeah.
So, those Mexicans and the Canadians are good, solid North Americans, but still have had plenty of their own problems. Guatemala, Paraguay.
Well, okay then. So if there's not much to discuss on the El Salvador thing, it's a non-issue basically. Would you like to go into the latest developments of libbitcoin? In our previous podcast, we went into it, but then I think we kind of like stopped towards the third hour, now we've got a good chunk of time where we can sort of detail.
How much time do we have left here? How much more time are you willing to invest in this?
Oh, another hour or so. We could go.
All right. Well, I have dinner engagement. Probably going to hit within. Just keep it no more than an hour.
Okay. Good. Okay. Great.
So
now we go into the code.
Yeah, the code. So I started working on the Bitcoin as one to just understand Bitcoin, and two to provide some support for a hardware wallet I was making. It was my first year working in Bitcoin. I found Amir, went out and met him, and then also Peter Hitchens.
The late Peter Hitchens.
Yeah, he's an awesome guy. He created 0MQ and ran that community exceedingly well for a long time,
and the C4.
Yeah, and to me, I think you mentioned the process aspect of it. I try to avoid any kind of process overhead in the Bitcoin. It's a very different philosophy. But
isn't that what the C4 is meant to do? It's meant to reduce as much process overhead as possible.
It's it's kind of like 0MQ. It's meant to be a messaging system with as little messaging system as you can have.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Zero message queue, right? It's the same idea. Like it's a process. It's kind of how they describe like agile methodology. The least process you could have and still call it a process. Right.
But are you more against the sort of optimistic merging of code?
No, I'm more optimistic than Peter ever was.
Oh wow. Okay, well there you go.
But that was philosophy, right? Merge first, ask questions later.
Yes.
One time I did a merge and I got some questions into 0MQ. I was a contributor to 0MQ as well.
Yes.
And I'm like, yeah, sorry, I fucked it up, and now I'm trying to unfuck it, and I fucked that up, and I'm, he's like, all right, don't worry about it. But I knew what I'd done. But it tends to create good community, but it's also you gotta keep it moving in one direction somehow. And he had the power to do that. I don't follow it much anymore. I do know. I was kind of online. I knew of some of the people that kept it going, but we still have a strong dependency on it.
Yeah, I do miss that guy so much. I used to have email interactions with him whenever I had some sort of question or thought or something. He would answer it almost immediately, very, very quickly, and it would be very short, succinct, directly to the point. And Oh, I do miss that.
Solid guy.
Yeah.
No, I didn't know him from Adam. I mean, Amir had decided to take a dependency on zero Q. It was already in the code.
Yeah.
And Amir had, you know, he's successfully met like many very well-known people. I mean, I'm not gonna name names.
Could you
but,
give me an introduction? Because he's actually kind of hard to sort of approach. I'd like an introduction.
I don't have any control over Amir.
No, nobody does.
But he made several important introductions for me very early on. It was very, very helpful for me. And he had incorporated some of Peter's philosophy into what we were doing with libbitcoin. And I think I just kind of started working in zero Q to do some things I needed to do. And then later I wanted it to do a SOX 5 proxy so we could do Tor.
Oh yeah.
And it wasn't possible without like building it into zero Q. It's a wire protocol. So
Yes.
He eventually agreed to do that, and I paid him to have it put into the open source. So we'd have it. And he got somebody to contract it out. But that was after I went out and met him. So I forget how that got started, but I just flew out to Brussels and spent a couple of days with him. And he was just such a gracious host, and he took me all around. Did he play guitar
with you and drink whiskey with you?
Yeah, we went around to different pubs, had some beers. I remember walking down the street in Brussels, just drinking a beer. And I was like, this is so fucking cool. Like, there's not many places in the world you can actually do that, like getting arrested.
Well, you can do it in Hong Kong.
What's that?
You could do it in Hong Kong. Club 7-Eleven is the best club in Hong Kong.
You just walk down the street with them, drinking.
If you want to, sure, go for it.
Yeah. Well, that was Brussels, and it was pretty cool. And I had been there before, but he gave me like a proper tour, walking tour all around the city. So I'll give you an example. One time we sat down on these bleachers by the river, facing the river, and there was a African drum band playing there. So
he's good at playing bongos, eh?
Congolese guys, right? And a lot of immigrants from the Belgian Congo, in Brussels. They have a little Congo neighborhood in the center of the city. And so they're playing conga drums and whatever. And they're just having a great time in front of us. And me and Peter just up on these like empty bleachers, just enjoying watching them, and beautiful sunny day, having a drink. And eventually the guy comes over to me with little bongos, and he puts them in my lap, and he wants me to play. And I'm like, I'm a white guy. I have no idea what I'm doing with this thing, right? No, but I actually, like, I did, when I remember in elementary school, I was actually a little band thing that toured around in different schools, and we did some of that. So I had some idea what I was doing, but I had no, I just couldn't. I'm fairly musically inclined, but I just felt so embarrassed that I had no idea what I was doing. And so I hand these things over to Peter sitting next to me, and I look, and he just starts wailing on these drums. He's fucking good, right? He's really good. And he laughs, and he hands the drums back to the guy, and they go away. All right, so that's just a setup for the story. So we go back to his place, and we're having barbecue or something. His wife's cooking, his kids are running around, and he points out that in the garage below his place is where the band plays, where they practice, and it's his band. So he never let on. They never let on. He just like fucking with me the whole time. Those are his buds from from Congo. He had grown up living in different places in Africa. I forget what the story was. Something with his parents. So he he's this pasty white European guy you would never guess, right? Grew up in Africa and played the drums like he grew up with them, like he probably did. And this was his band.
I think his wife was Congolese, wasn't she? I think his wife was Congolese, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was. Yeah. I think he had two girls and his wife. I met them. Super nice. They took us, so him and his wife took and maybe another friend, I forget, took me out to dinner in Little Congo neighborhood. And it just, little boutique restaurant with a few tables, and got some authentic food. It was really, really, really pretty nice. Awesome fun. So I was just thinking, man, it'd be so much fun to, just come here and hang out. Like, every couple of years or so. I mean, he wasn't an older guy. I mean, he could be around for a while.
Yeah,
He's
sure.
probably my age. But yeah, little did I know at the time that he had previously had a bout with lung cancer, and it was in remission. So he was,
Yeah.
as far as anybody knew, he was fine. But
I
it came
think,
back and killed him in very
yeah,
short order. And
yeah. I
I
think that
remember
was from, yeah.
he was apparently working right up until the end,
Yeah.
trying to get keys moved and people lined up, take care of stuff.
Yeah.
I was a maintainer on a couple of ZMQ repositories, and one of them was the a script language that they wrote, that we still use extensively in
Oh,
Bitcoin.
that's the finite state machine one.
I don't know if you would call it that.
I even
It's
forgot the name
what's
of
it
that
called? Oh my God, I can't remember the name.
Zinc. Was it Zinc?
No, that's not what I'm talking about.
Okay.
So the repository was IMATIX, which is the name of his company, and I just have to pull up my source repo here to see. Can't remember what it was. GSL, yeah.
That's the one. That's the one. That's the finite state machine. Yeah.
Language or something, right?
Yeah.
And so it's pretty obscure.
Yeah,
But you compile it. I did some work on it to fix some issues that I do most of my work on Windows actually, and I always have. And he had some issues with it, so I fixed them up, and I was a maintainer in it. There wasn't a lot of activity, but after he passed, I realized that nobody had the keys. Like nobody. I had commit authority to it, but I didn't have administrative control.
Oh, shite.
So we ended up talking with the guys from ZeroMQ, because that was a separate repo, right? IMATIX had GSL, and we moved GSL into ZeroMQ. We just cloned the thing, and that's how that got resolved. So it's still there. But yeah, he was, he was working, taking care of things right at the end, answering questions.
Yeah.
Too bad.
Good old soldier. Come on, let's get back onto libbitcoin.
Yeah. So I met those two guys, decided to take this on as a project, and eventually it became like the main thing I do is just work on the Bitcoin. And then that led to better understanding of things, along my long-term interest in economics and kind of libertarian or anarchist kind of political theory, all blended very nicely with my background in programming, my interest in Digicash back in the 90s, and PGP and applied cryptography, all those things that I was into back then, as well as business, entrepreneurship, finance. It just all kind of investment all made sense to me. So I just decided to keep working on this if I find something better to do. And so I helped. Amir had released a first version of the Bitcoin's like a bunch of different things, a development toolkit. It wasn't as kind of, it was organized differently than it is now. And now it's 10 repositories, which each have a kind of a separate, one's a database, one's a node, it's a command line tools, one's a server, client library, general purpose library, things like that. So those pieces are we have a lot of code generation, which helps us maintain these set of libraries, but these are designed as developer tools. So it's not like just a application like Bitcoin, right? It's meant for you to be able to build, work with the protocols, add protocols, remove protocols, work with, store design, all these different aspects fairly easily, and to be able to build real Bitcoin stuff, not connect to some web service API, and to not have to drag around, a core node wherever you go. Because to me, I always liken that to like Netscape Navigator, right? Back in the days of you wanted to do something with the web, you had to just fire up Netscape Navigator and grab onto its API endpoints, run a page inside of it, or I forget, you could I think you had to talk to it externally too. And eventually, the stuff got all integrated into the platforms as web APIs, internet APIs, mail, all these things, right? So that's kind of how I always looked at Bitcoin D. Is like this thing was devised as a proof of concept prototype application, not as a way for people to build applications. And that's kind of been one of the struggles in the Bitcoin community for a long time, is that,
You're absolutely right about that, Eric. You're absolutely right about that. And I would love to see an evolution towards more projects utilizing libbitcoin instead of core, because it is a monolith type scenario. And yeah, I have a whole bunch of issues that can go into that, but I'd let you. I don't want to interrupt you.
You'd guess at all of them. But no, I mean, feel free to interrupt. I just ramble on until you do.
Okay.
But it has a ways to go. So it's not like I can just tell it. I don't go out and like do promos for libbitcoin. I just work on it. Right? People ask me and I tell them. I try to downplay like where it is at different times. So there's like version 3 was released. So I helped Amir a little bit with version 2, but I was just learning and figuring it out, and then helped him get that out the door. And then third version, I had a much bigger role in version 3, and I still maintain that. It's still the release version, and that goes back 5 years at least. Right. There hasn't been a release since then. And so what I started doing was, once I'd gotten to that point where we released that, the code was organized, a lot of dependencies trimmed out. I did an awful lot of stuff just kind of on code maintainability, organization quality, added CI, just a lot of stuff. And then I started working on architectural improvements. A lot of the core architectural stuff, Amir, really he devised the same. It's all in there presently. What his ideas, but they weren't. There were still issues with implementation, like design issues. So somewhere between architecture and design, there were a lot of changes that had to happen to get to the point where we were achieving what we wanted to achieve. Performance-wise is a big one, but also modularity, abstraction, componentization, test coverage, all these things. So I did about 2 years worth of kind of steady work on a V4. Got pretty far along with it, and then hit what I considered a very problematic a couple issues that told me that it had to be a more fundamental redesign to the way we dealt with storage and retrieval of data. And so Amir built his own memory map file system based store, which has some significant advantages and also some significant disadvantages. And so when I started to hit issues there that couldn't easily be overcome, I started focusing more on. It was probably coincidental. I was at the same time starting to speak and write and all that, and then did my conference. So it was about 2 year time frame where I did a lot less work on the Bitcoin, and I was just working on the economic stuff. But I always wanted. I always wanted to get this to a certain point where I saw it could be, and so I got the books out. I got some people ask me about translations, so those have come out. But I don't spend as absolutely little time as I can on that. I spend all my time on Bitcoin. So for the last almost 2 years now, just been full time and working on libbitcoin, and I just kind of went through each one of the repositories. From the ground up, and made sure I had the performance characteristics I wanted and everything, test coverage I wanted, reliability, maintainability, abstractions the way I wanted. And so that when I got up to the higher levels, I was building on stuff that I could rely on. And that has been very successful. I now can work, effortlessly, where I used to kind of struggle to, with the lower levels. And so I'll give you one example. Most libraries you'll look at that have like cryptography stuff in it, either like cryptographic hashes or signatures or key derivation algorithms, things like that. I don't know, what level of technical expertise you have.
No, I'm well on this. You can go much deeper if you want.
So, all of these things tend to be like a single C source file that somebody drops into the repo. Yes. Don't touch it, right? It came from academia. It came out of a book. It came out of a well-respected, crypto library. And I dropped one or two of these things in there myself. I worked on libsodium for a while because libsodium had become a dependency of 0MQ, and I needed to make the dependency work in my build system. So I got to know the guy, Frank. Somebody does libsodium And I remember dropping some stuff from that in there. And then there's also not just cryptographic stuff, but there's also encodings like base 58 encoding, base 64.
Yes,
We have
yes.
like 8 encodings in libbitcoin. So these things had, you know, all the licenses were legit, but just a hodgepodge of random stuff that if you looked at it, you would have no idea what it was doing, and you couldn't apply general enhancements to the set of things. Like, for example, if you want to do vectorization across all the SHA variants, right? You got a different problem for each implementation. 512 is different than 256. Like, I'm looking at this going, okay, I just read the SHA specification from NIST, I think it is, and I'm like, this is just one thing. Right? What do you have, like 4 implementations of SHA-1, SHA-256, SHA-512, right? We got a different implementation to optimize double hashing. We got different variants of key derivation on top of each one of them.
Huh.
So I was like, I just got fed up with it, and I just tossed it all. I tossed every bit of it, and I rewrote all that shit myself.
Holy, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
You go to the Bitcoin system and drill into the hash library. All those hash functions have our license on them and ours alone. I went from the specs and wrote them.
Well done.
So they're all templates, right? Now, so there's 2 basic templates. There's a SHA template, and there's a
not so keen on C++ templates though.
Oh, metaprogramming is where it's at, man. C++ templates are awesome. You gotta learn them. And once you do, it opens up a whole new world. I can remember being very frustrated with C++ templates and not really quite getting it. And I spent the time this time around to really, really embrace it. And now it's powerful. And so, for example, SHA implement. There's SHA-1 or 160, SHA-256, SHA-512, but there's also subvariants of all those SHAs. And then there's RIPE-MD, but RIPE-MD is a variant of Message Digest.
Yes.
MD4, MD5, RIPE-MD, right? And there's a couple variants of RIPE-MD. We're 128, 160. And so Bitcoin doesn't use all of these, but like it uses most of them. And so I just said, I'm going to fully general. I got a template for SHA follows a certain pattern, and Message Digest also follows a certain pattern. So I said, I'll make an MD template and a SHA template, and then I'll just pass in templates that define all the parameterizations for the different variants, and boom, done. All done, one implementation, and then just different things like so the whole thing is, I don't know if you know this, where you are in C++, but const expression is this very powerful.
Yes.
Right. So those templates are const expression templates.
Okay. So
I can say const expression auto foo equals, SHA-256.
And it builds it for you.
And I get the value. Right.
That's great.
SHA-256, the word Bitcoin. Right. And
that's great.
That's const expression. Now, if you know what const expression is, that's freaking crazy, right? You have limits of iteration and depth.
Yes,
const expression evaluation, because it's all evaluated by the compiler at compile time.
Yes.
But it's also like I do all my work in Visual Studio, again, always have, and it evaluates those expressions in the interpreter. Like when you're just sitting there, you don't have to run the compiler. It's just like, so I just hover over the thing, and I get the run, kind of dynamic evaluation of a SHA-512 hash with key derivation on it. And so all of those functions I just mentioned to you are const expression templates, with exception of the accumulator. When you're iterating over the accumulator and you're allocating for that can't be.
You can't do that.
Right, but all of our
accumulator.
All of those. So what that allows me to do is declare literals that are intuitively, you can read them, right? I can take this and I'm going to hash it. I'm going to declare that as a literal, so I get compile time evaluation, but I don't have to go and just stuff in a number that nobody knows what it means, right?
Great.
And so anyway, there was one of the things that allowed me to do was put in vectorization. I did Intel vectorization for a 16 lanes. Is it 2, 4, 8, 16 lanes? All in one template. for all the SHAs. And so, it's super powerful. I'm like,
applied cryptography, Eric Voskuil style.
Vectorization is extremely important optimization technique for SHA hashing, and I was able to apply it. I went and read some academic papers. I looked at what I understood at that point of it myself, and I said, okay, we can apply vectorization to the generation of the what's it called? Essentially the message buffer that you're going to then iterate over. So you can do that concurrently, but then there's also vectorization that can be applied in other aspects of SHA. And then there's vectorization from not just that's Intel, right? That's Intel native machine codes, but then you've got like ARM as well.
Okay,
and so ARM vectorization is just another template.
This is great to hear.
Exact code. So what I did is I took all of the operators and or not, all the native operators, and I put them into a set of very simple functors, right? Constant expression functions. So they just get defined and they're nothing, right? And then I provided a alternate implementation using the vector implementations.
That's fantastic work. That's fantastic work.
I just select, which kind of math you want to use. You want to use vector math, you want to use, and it's one template, right? And then I can drop in the ARM ones as well. So one template, one implementation. It's all vectorizations. It's all pretty much the same, right? And I just implement the operators differently, and those are just like little one-line functions, right? And so if you look at like the optimization code for vectorization or native SHA implementation in core, your head's gonna fucking spin, right? Yes. All this stuff it's literally cut and pasted out of somebody's implementation, most of it, of how to do SHA with vectorization from Intel, whatever. And there's like 4 different ways it's done for different purposes. I just have one, right, for all of them. So, and I did performance comparisons, right? So I did. You can't get that's all C stuff, and you can't get C style performance out of C++ unless you really know what you're doing, right? And I didn't really know what I was doing, but I figured it out. And my objective was to do all this in C++, because my theory is C++ is just as fast as C. You're not a dumbass. And so, for example, when you have a buffer, a memory buffer, an array of bytes, C that has a C style array, and you can use that in C++. But you really want to use a standard array. A standard array has you can't just like,
it's got overhead.
It doesn't have overhead. That's the thing. It's the way you use it that produces overhead.
Oh, okay.
No, we're getting maybe too technical for the audience, but
no. You'd be surprised about this audience. I met one.
Well, I like this stuff, right? Yeah. I spent a lot of time on this one issue. I never would have been able to produce these templates that provided these advantages. With this, I have better performance than a C implementation. I have Core's actual code of their implementation in my test library, and I compile that side by side with mine, and I make sure it's apples to apples comparison on what type of optimizations I'm getting, and I run it side by side, and I have 5 to 10% edge across the board. And that's a C versus C++ implementation. That's specialized hand wound, like machine code against compiler generated code from C++. Intel. And so I have far more maintainable and testable code and readable code. And I just got a big kick out of doing it, and I get better performance too. So to be fair, one thing I haven't done yet is I haven't put in the what's called the SHA intrinsics. I have it all stubbed in, but I haven't done it yet. I decided to move on to something else. But SHA intrinsics is actually SHA-256 and SHA-1 in the CPU, which Intel does have and ARM does have, and they're different in just like vectorization, right? And that is the biggest optimization you can get.
You don't get any faster than that.
No, I don't think so. It's like 10 times faster than. So I will have that
be magic.
All SHA implementations. I'll have it for SHA. I don't think Core doesn't do it for SHA-1. Why bother?
No.
But it's in the template. It doesn't matter to me. So it's SHA-1, SHA-2.
Now you're just flexing.
Well, I mean,
I'm just joking.
The SHA intrinsics only support SHA-1 and like SHA-256, not SHA-512. So you can only do what they have. But Yeah, it's fun. It's cool. Like I don't get off on doing super like cryptic C style coding, and a lot of other people do. I get off on making super high level abstract coding that you can read and understand. It doesn't do like if I do something tricky that somebody's not going to get, I get uncomfortable, and I'm like, I want to just look at this and understand what I'm doing. And so what I'll do is I'll find a place to put that tricky thing that needs to be done, and I'll give it a name, and I'll provide that, and I'll say boom. And so I get off on being able to get, as good or better performance than you can get with something like C, and making it very readable, right, and very maintainable and very testable and very generalized. And so that is like it's a very different approach. Most people that you see, many people, I should say most, but many people you see that work in C++ actually have a C background. I did, right? And write like C coders. And a lot of the stuff I see as sample code or core code looks like C code to me. And that's probably because they're arguing, well, this is how you get performance. And it is an easy way to get performance. And it gives you the performance without compiler optimizations, which is an advantage. Like you will not get comparable performance in libbitcoin on like the SHA optimizations unless you have full compiler optimizations turned on, because the compiler will give you the level of abstraction you want. If you say like, iterate through all this stuff many times, or just flatten the loop, it'll do what you tell it, right? So in like the SHA,
inline it,
they just do the loop flattening manually.
Yeah.
So it's always flattened. Okay. Well, I don't want to show loop flattening in my code. I want the compiler to vectorize stuff, right?
Yes.
So I actually wrote a template that would take a for loop
and flatten it
and unwind the for loop.
Okay.
So in other words, if you have something that's for I equals 1 to 8, copy, each one of these integers into a buffer, which is kind of what you do in SHA-256, right? You're just copying like sets of 32 or 64-bit integers and from one place to another. Well, if you tell the compiler, here's an array of integers, I need to copy the array from one place to another, the compiler will vectorize it automatically if you tell it to, right? Or you can vectorize it yourself. Well, explicitly, which means you're writing native compiler specific code. So now it's not portable. Okay, so you get portability from letting the compiler do it. But you could write like a for loop that just does a bunch of these operations a bunch of times, which in implementation, what you want is it's actually such a high level of kind of cost reduction that you're really willing to unwind like a 64 times loop. 64 times, right? Like just repeat the same code 64 times or 128 times or 90 times, whatever it is in SHA.
Yes.
And it's like maybe like 20, 30 CPU instructions in each one. And you just want to flatten it right out. So you can either write that stuff in C so that those expand out, right? Or you could write a loop that is implemented as a template that is implemented in such a way that when the compiler goes to optimize it, it will automatically flatten it.
And then you get a few lines. Good job.
And so it looks like a loop. It looks like it, it makes sense. Oh yeah, we're just iterating over this stuff, but that's got to be bad performance, right? And then you look at the the decompilation. Like, that's pretty cool. But so what happened was I actually ended up not. I implemented that one example, and I ended up not using it because when I looked at the assembly code that I expected to be flattened, it wasn't flattened. I'm like, oh, God damn it. All that work, to make this elegant, tiny little template that just basically, so every time you compile a template in C++, if the template parameter, the template arguments are different, you get a different implementation.
Yes.
Right. So it's like, if I have an integer, like in as a template,
it's going to create a new thing. Yeah.
If it's 1, it creates one function. If it's a 2, it creates another function. 3, another function, right?
Yes.
So you can intentionally unwind by making one of the template arguments you can intentionally create independent functions by making the template arguments just an integer sequence. That's the theory, right? And so if you make that integer sequence, you get a new function for each one. And if you tell it to inline the functions, they're just going to get inlined right there, and they're each unique. So there's no iteration at all, right? And you're just using the high level iteration is really just template iteration. It's not iteration, it's template projection, basically.
Yes.
You're projecting a loop into a flattened set of uniquely independent functions, and then you're removing the stack calls by telling it to inline it. And Then I realized that with the right compiler optimizations, it would have worked, but I just didn't have the right compiler optimizations, and I was too burned out on it at that point to go back and re-implement it. So there is some manual loop flattening in like one case where that would have been the only resolution.
Yeah.
But I find it worth the time to provide the proper level of abstraction, so that if you go and look at our SHA code and you go and open up NIST whatever and read the specification, you can associate each. I actually, it was a lot of I had a comment which attached each single statement in the implementation to a line in the specification.
Well done.
First, I did that. I checked it all in, and that's like how I make sure like nobody's going to say I stole this implementation from them, right? This is right off the spec. But then I deleted all the comments. It was taking up a lot of space, and it made it harder to read. When comments start making your code harder to read, you've done it right, right? You delete the comments to make it readable.
Yeah. So I'm in a position now where I'm looking to integrate libbitcoin into a particular project I'm working on. Just go briefly. I'm looking at creating little solar. I call it a solar miner. So it's in the previous podcast I did, it was with a fellow by the name of Scott, who implemented this board called the BitAxe. And well, I want to swap out the ESP32 with an STM32, which is ARM. And well, I mean, it's still very, what I'm talking about now with libbitcoin is still later in the pipeline, so I haven't really thought about it that clearly. But does this stuff, does libbitcoin, can I get it to execute in a operating system-less environment, like if I can get it to work directly on the bare metal, for example, the MCU, the STM32? I'm thinking about doing that, and yeah.
So when you say get libbitcoin, what part of libbitcoin do you
mean? I mean, see, these are it won't you, for example, you won't do the data storage on these little devices. You know, the device has got like 1 meg of RAM, 2 megs of flash, and I think that's just not possible to do that. So you want to somehow have some sort of a gateway node which will store the entire thing, and then that node will ship off the data to each one of the solar. It's just basically it's a PCB that bolts onto the back of a solar panel. And
okay, so you have a node being maintained somewhere that's doing it's basically operating as a mining server for your mining farm.
Yes.
Okay, so that scenario is one of the prime target scenarios that I work towards.
Yes,
where an individual single person can set up their own distributed mining operation with ease and extremely high performance, where you're still dealing with being small and having so latency and variance, but
you can't avoid that.
The cost of latency as much as possible by making you able to begin mining.
Yes.
In the least amount of time from when you are first aware of something new happening.
Yes.
And reducing latency between your node and your mining rigs.
Yes.
And maintaining your accounting information if you're going to be doing any kind of share-based mining as well, right? If you're
exactly
and your friends mining, right? So the everything from the distribution of the mining work, maintaining of the chain, and maintenance of the administrative information for running what's essentially a pool, right? That's all well within my vision. That is my mining scenario. To just drop in a single binary executable and run it. Portability,
but no operating system, huh?
So the operating system dependencies are certainly there.
Yeah.
The Bitcoin's dependencies are really, really minimal, but
you're still using libc and all that, right?
What's that?
You're still using libc and all that, right?
Libc. Well, there's a lot of use of this. I'm sure it boils down to libc under the standard C++ libraries as well. But those can be statically linked, so that's not.
Yes, that's true. That is true. That is true. Yeah, you can do that.
We provide full static linking of the entire thing. So one of my goals for distribution, like I worked in a corporate IT. I sold to corporate IT departments. Like that's how I sold my company to Microsoft, right? I really focused on like it was a distributed type of system on a corporate IT network, and how do you get this out there to other machines? Well, the simplest way to put something out onto other machines, make it a single executable, right? And no dependencies except the lowest possible level of dependencies on the operating system itself. And so that's what libbitcoin is. It is, you can statically link it, the node or the server or the command line tools into a single, I do it, these are actually the ones that are available for download. You can, for Mac, Windows, and Ubuntu, I'm sure other variants, but, so I would actually, I would compile it down to a single static link executable, and then just drop it on a machine and run it, and it's fully portable on those machines. And I would go through the link, the linkage on the file and make sure, we didn't have anything on there that was going to be a problem. And so that's where you see it, right? That's where you see the operating system dependencies is in the executables linkage to various things. And there's a lot of linkage in there. We're talking, about pretty low level stuff like, drive controllers and, abstractions that are provided by the operating system. So the Bitcoin is not going to operate without an underlying operating system, because, we're not going to do raw memory management or device management like disk drive or network management. That stuff's got to be, that's too low level for a full implementation to implement itself. Be reinventing the wheel. So the question then is, well, can you operate on the, minimal operating system? Like Windows has, for example, headless variants, and Linux has always been a headless variant. You have to add the head later. And Mac OS and stuff. I don't know if you could, can you get Mac OS without the Windows, but say you just take, your bare metal, lowest level Debian implementation, least dependencies, and that'd be what you'd be looking at for an operating system, which is pretty small, right? And
I know it's in my environment. I think it's too tight for that. It's STM32, man. This is like MCU stuff. And
well, if you're talking about maintaining the chain.
Oh, I mean, okay. Now that would be done on the gateway node, which you would have a full operating system and whatnot in there.
Okay,
so I suppose that's fine.
So,
that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah. When you're talking about doing the mining, right? Actually hash iteration, that kind of stuff.
It would be done on
the communication between that and the node is what you're talking about. You need the libbitcoin stack to do the communication, right?
Yeah.
Well, we have a thing called libbitcoin client, which is basically just the same. It's the same 0MQ. So we layer our client server queries on top of 0MQ, on the client and the server. So the client server basically are both talking 0MQ, and they're communicating. It's basically the low level implementation is perfectly symmetrical, because that's how 0MQ is. But then you layer the client aspects of the query. So the client aspects provide some abstractions. You might ask for a bunch of public query stuff, and then you assemble it into something that's more meaningful, like a wallet balance or something like that. But that client aspect is not necessary. If you have the ability to make a 0MQ message, you can do it with whatever you've got, right? So you can do it with 0MQ in Python, which is very, very easy to do.
Yes.
You don't have to communicate 0MQ. You could use HTTP. There'll be web proxy sitting there as well. We had that stubbed in V4, and that's part of some of the rework I'm doing. But so.
That answers my question. That's good, because then I can sort of take I can take the information and wrap it up in the transport that I'm going to be creating, which won't be 0MQ, it won't be HTTP, it'll be another separate protocol that I'm creating.
So if you make your own domain specific protocol between client and server, then you just end up having to write the proxy to libbitcoin.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So that then it doesn't matter what implementation you have or what our operating system dependencies are, right? You do whatever you want.
Yes.
But if you wanted to make it fast and less proprietary, I would go with 0MQ. I would just use their wire protocol. It's just bit for bit, laid out.
Yeah,
I don't know. Seriously, like when the description of 0MQ is, it's the least amount of protocol you can have and still have a protocol. It's very true.
Yeah.
There's it provides you this abstraction over your network, your Ethernet versus token ring, that kind of stuff. TCP IP versus whatever other protocol you might.
So the thing is, I'm not using TCP IP. Between the node,
You don't have to.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
But I'm saying is on ZeroMQ, ZeroMQ doesn't know about the underlying protocol.
That's just a wrapper, right? Yeah. Okay.
Well, I mean, you in the URI, when you initiate the service on the client and the server, you provide it basically URI. You say this is and there's a TCP URI. There's a
arbitrary URIs. You fill in the blank.
Trying to think of some of these, but so you can use like a named pipe, right? Like on the machine, there is no protocol really. You're just sharing a memory buffer between the two, and the code is not my code, and the implementation is no different depending on what protocol you use. That's one of the beautiful things about ZeroMQ.
I see.
You're only doing the messaging. The network protocol is none of your business, right? And you can access aspects of it that are kind of necessary to access, like timeouts or things like that that are implemented in the lower level protocol. Keep alive, things like that. They're exposed with higher level abstractions in ZeroMQ, but basically you're never talking that lower level protocol.
Okay.
So if you have a mining rig out there that wants to speak, the binary language of evaporators, what is it, Bocce? You can implement that low level protocol between these two things and bind ZeroMQ to it, and then just send a message, hand rolled message. The server won't need a proxy. That's the point of what I'm saying. If that wire protocol that you're using, not TCP, if it's a wire protocol that there's a binding for ZeroMQ that exists, then ZeroMQ, you just type it into the URL. You don't have to change our code at all. It's just text in the config file. Yeah,
I need to create that binding then.
Yeah. Okay. So if it was a protocol that didn't have a ZeroMQ binding, you just write that binding.
Yeah.
You get it into the ZeroMQ library if it's going to be like some kind of open source thing that other people want to use, or you just embed it in your own product, right?
Yeah.
And then you just send. I mean, you're actually, when you're sending messages, you're literally looking at. There's nothing complex in the packets, right? Yeah. You're just literally looking at, here's the header, here's the body. This is how the bytes are laid out, and I lay those out when I make them the messages. Yeah. So, our team, has documented each of those individual messages. So it's really about the underlying message transport.
Right. No, it would be going over the LoRa network. So I'm this board that I'm building, or modifying rather now. I was going to build it. I'm going to put a LoRa transmitter on there, and the idea is to communicate between the gateway router and these solar panels that would be installed, and with the PCB bolted onto the back. They would be talking
like Wi-Fi or something like that.
Well, I mean, you could use Wi-Fi, but there's also another aspect to this, which is that I want this thing to be a communications network that can go kilometers, and Wi-Fi. If you want to broadcast kilometers, you need significant more power than LoRa. LoRa allows you to go tens of kilometers. You also need
some sort of regulatory approval that you won't get.
No. Actually, LoRa has a frequency.
No, I mean with Wi-Fi.
Oh yes, of course. Yeah, most likely. I
had a Wi-Fi booster because he was on a boat and he would go down the coastline and be a couple miles offshore, be getting free Wi-Fi from restaurants and stuff on the beach. Crazy, but yeah, you can boost Wi-Fi pretty good.
Yeah, but then you need the big antenna sort of things, and
and you're going to run into regulatory issues.
Yes. But with LoRa, all of that sort of stuff goes away. But you just have to be very conscious about how much data you send across this little pipeline, and it's not much at all. It's not.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you wanted to do that cleanly, you just make yourself an abstract transfer protocol, and then just
Yeah.
You don't need to do anything except probably compile in that protocol.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I think this answers the question. I mean, later on down the line, once I've got a lot of the infrastructure sort of set up, I'll take a look. I'll take a bash at trying to get.
But we still have a little bit of ways to go to get to the point where the node is fully up. The server sits on top of the node, and the server is fairly mature. Simple, basically a ZeroMQ wrapper that provides the public API and the endpoints for the node. The node otherwise just syncs up the chain. There's nothing to do with it unless you
yeah.
derive from it. So right now, our focus has been entirely on the node and I'm doing like daily syncs and, optimization for the node. But I've got, certainly more time to go on that. And then probably sticking it under the server is a matter of like a month, to redo all the queries from V3 and everything. So, it's there, it's coming along, but it's not there, not ready yet. I don't want to think.
No, that's okay. But
it's ready to go.
But yeah, anyway, we should probably wrap up the conversation. You've got a dinner appointment, and Eric, it's been fantastic having you on. I really appreciate this sort of like focus of a refocus, should I say? Hopefully the Bitcoiners can watch this and sort of like think, oh, okay, much ado about nothing. Let's get back to some real work.
Thanks, and best of luck on this project. It's like one of those things I love to see. With or without the Bitcoin, right? It's just that's great stuff. It's like, Steve Barber came to the conference and I think it was the first time we met, but I like it's similar in a way to some of the work that he does with his small scale Bitcoin flare gas mining rigs.
Yes. I think he's doing generators now, rather large scale generators.
I think he's making money hand over fist. I have no idea, but he just looks like
he's a fascinating fellow, that guy.
yeah. I think he's doing it right. It was really he came to the conference and he presented me with a gift. It was a hat, which is his brand of one of his his home gym, and so he presented me with this as a gift. He was speaking at the conference and he got me up on stage. He gave me this thing and he told a little story about how he got started and how he named his where that company brand came from. And it was the first chapter in my book. So he'd read the book, he'd taken all these lessons to heart. The axiom of resistance, the ohm is the engineering term for resistance.
Yes.
That's how we chose it, which I thought was
that's brilliant.
It was really touching. Yeah. So I didn't realize that the writings had been out there long enough for somebody to actually start a company. But yeah, it's been, time just goes by so fast.
No, you underestimate yourself. You're a force of nature in this field, and thank you for it. Thank you for it. You've influenced a lot of people I know, as well as myself.
It's nice to hear.
Thank you very much.
It's good to hear it. All right,
okay,
well, thanks for
let's
having me
wrap
out.
it up then.
See you next time I'm in Hong Kong.
Thanks so much, Bye-bye.